Democracy is there. The power does not belong to the government, it belongs to the people. But the people have to claim it. And you see, power without transparency disempowers the people. The people cannot oversee and control the government if there is secrecy. And that's precisely why governments want secrecy, because they don't want to be controlled. Now, humans are not made to be democratic by nature. If they get power and no one controls them, they will abuse power. Everyone has this tendency. So it's not about bad people or good people, it's about bad systems or good systems. Good systems are systems that don't give any space to unchecked power. So for now, we still have democracy. But once it has become a crime to tell the truth, then we will have tyranny. And then it will be too late to speak out, because now you have become a spy as soon as you tell the truth. And you will spend the rest of your life in a dungeon.
So those are some very important words coming from the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Niels Melzer. So hi, everyone, and welcome once again to the Free Assange Vigil. I'm Taylor Hudak. I am joined by my co-hosts, Andrew Smith and Steve Poikinen. Later on tonight, we will be joined by our guest co-host, Susie Dawson, and then we have two special guests that will be joining us as well. But before that, I want to give you guys some stats. As usual, it is 62 days until the start of the second round of Julian Assange's extradition hearing. Also, it is 3,388 days since the start of the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange, and 341 days since his trafficking from the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh following a $4.2 billion international monetary loan to Ecuador. So before we do introduce our guest for the evening, I want to touch on Chelsea Manning's situation. Fortunately, right now, we do not have to provide stats for her because she has been released from prison, which is a great thing. My co-host did an episode on this last week. I believe it was the next day or that day that we found out. So I encourage everybody to check that out later on. But Chelsea Manning has been freed. However, the judge did require her to pay off that fine. Remember, she was being fined $1,000 a day. And fortunately, because of all of her supporters, she was able to acquire enough money to pay off this fine, and then also an additional $40,000 that she will need. Of course, this is going to be a healing time for her because she has been subjected to torture and has spent the majority of her adult life in prison. So we want to highlight the fact that she is freed, and the grand jury investigation into WikiLeaks has been dropped. And we can assume, but we're not sure, that there have been no additional charges that have resulted from that grand jury investigation, considering Chelsea Manning is now freed. However, that doesn't mean that charges could be filed in the future, but as of now, we believe that no charges have been a result of that grand jury. So very good news with that. I think we were all quite surprised about this, but very pleased. And Andrew and Steve, I know you guys, like I said, did an episode about this. If you want to weigh in with some of your thoughts on what happened this past week as well.
Yeah, we went live as soon as we could on Thursday to discuss it. It was a shock. On top of being a shock, it was fantastic news because along with that, Jeremy Hammond's contempt charge was also dismissed. So he's been returned to the custody of the Bureau of Prisons. He had a very short time left on his original sentence that he was serving before he got yanked out of there and sent to Virginia. So he'll be ostensibly finishing his sentence and getting out of prison as well as a result of this. The entire 10-year WikiLeaks grand jury was dismissed. And as you mentioned, I mean, $256,000 in fines raised in 36 hours, something like that. Almost $40,000 for her to be able to like pay off her storage, get back on her feet, do have some semblance of a life again, um, in a matter of days. The outpouring of support that Chelsea Manning has received is just like it does my heart good. It does. That's not We don't have a lot going on that's absolutely just killer news. And even though it is Chelsea Manning, it was her incarceration. It There's always that element of, because her sentence was commuted, uh, that she could be hauled in front of a different grand jury. But for now, we're just kind of taking the win and rolling with it. Andrew?
Yeah, just to give a little recap, because it's hard to keep track of things. Chelsea Manning was put into jail last decade under a military court where she gave her deposition. She was found guilty. The United States was forced to admit in court that that no one had been hurt as a result of her leaks. Um, she served, I believe it was 8 years. President Obama commuted her at the end of 2016. She went free July 2017, and was free for 18 months. In that time, Chelsea Manning did a bunch of things, was going around the world giving speaking events. But most importantly, at least in my opinion, most importantly, she ran for Senate, Maryland Senate. And um, the independent media basically ignored her, which broke my heart to see because I had tried to reach out and help her in her political campaign in the means and ways that I could. Um, but fast forward, the end of that 18 months, she did not win. She got, I believe it was like 3 or 5% in the primary, and then ended up back in jail. The grand jury pulled her in for 3 to 5 months after she had gotten out of, or after that 18 months of freedom. And they were literally trying to get her to say the same exact things that she was before, where she had been in that military trial. And she said, "No, I refuse. I've given you all the information that you need. There's nothing more that I can tell you." And so they found her, I believe it was in contempt, I believe, not 100% positive of what the legal term is there, but they basically put her in court because she refused to perjure herself by trying to restate the things that she had already talked about previously, um, and refused to basically comply with the United States coercing her into saying that Julian Assange was more involved than he was in this entire situation. Um, Fast forward, after those 3 to 5 months, she was released. That grand jury that was around her, um, I believe it was dismissed, that previous one, which wasn't the same one as the WikiLeaks grand jury, if I remember properly. They let her out of prison for 1 week. She was free for 7 days before they brought her in for a press conference where, not for a press conference, for the same grand jury, essentially asking her the same thing. She refused to testify against Julian. She refused to lie about the situation and say that he was more involved than he actually was, simply as someone that she sent information to and someone that helped her get literal movies and videos and things like that that actually came out in the WikiLeaks trial, in the first week of trials, that Julian had helped her literally just like torrent, essentially. So she sat in jail for another year, 365 days on the dot. The grand jury against WikiLeaks was dismissed, like Steven said, and Chelsea Manning was released. Um, the WikiLeaks grand jury being nullified or being dismissed does not mean, and I repeat, does not mean the charges against Julian Assange have been dropped. He is still facing 17 counts under the Espionage Act and 1 count of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. Those charges are still very real. Those charges still exist against him, and it is something that we still have to fight to get Julian Assange free. We have to demand the extradition end against him and that he is allowed to be free. And it's something we'll get into a little bit later, actually, about how the UK is preparing their court systems and their legal processes and their jails to handle the coronavirus. And so far, the movement is they have not freed Julian Assange in the wake of the literal global pandemic, where they're releasing other prisoners, where the US is releasing citizen prisoners that have committed no nonviolent offenses, which is important to make a distinction. I would point people back to actually Steve and Jeff Black's video that they did last night. Steve's wonderful interview with him over on Slow News Day. But long story short, these charges against Julian still exist, and it's something that we still have to keep fighting against, because we cannot allow Julian to be extradited. We know what will happen when he is brought to this country. So something that we're rolling out as the Action for Assange crew here, if you go to our website, we have a new post up called the Thursday Toolbox. There's 3 different tools that are listed in there. One of them is ResistBot, one of them is contactingcongress.org, and I can't remember the name of the third one, but it's basically a tool to see the social media profiles for your elected representatives. ResistBot, I personally think, will be the most powerful tool because it allows you to send faxes to both state and federal legislatures, as well as some other people within the administration. And that's a free service. So you literally just direct message them on Twitter, through a text messaging shortcode, through iMessaging, through Facebook Messenger, or through their website portal. And you can send messages, you can send faxes, like shitty fax machine faxes, to your elected representatives, or any elected representative who you can find their area code. If you use contactingcongress.org, it gives you the local, like the office addresses and the office phone numbers for the federal representatives. And the power there, like Mrs. Assange says all the time, is you can send them handwritten letters and call the staff that work there directly and tell them, we demand that the extradition against Julian Assange end. And the other tool that's up there allows you to connect with elected representatives on social media. You type in your zip code and it gives you their YouTube, their Twitter, their Facebook, and their phone number. So that allows you to just blast them on social media if you're someone that's more comfortable doing that than making a phone call. And what we're doing and why we're calling it the Thursday Toolbox, we hope this is something that people will do all of the time. But what we're trying to do is specifically ask people every Thursday to take some portion of your time, hopefully at least an hour, or adding an extra hour to the activism that you already do, to use these tools specifically to contact federal and state representatives to tell them to end the extradition. I personally think it would be awesome if you guys sitting there listening to us right now would use ResistBot as we're talking and continually send faxes to your elected representative as the vigil's going on. The one thing we ask above and beyond everything is that you engage politely. We know they're crooks. We know they're criminals. They've looted from us. They've given $2.2 trillion to the banks in the last, I don't know, freaking week now. But you catch more bees with honey. If someone picks up a fax and it says, "You're a piece of shit," like, they're not going to read it. But if they pick it up and it says Julian Assange is facing 175 years in prison for revealing the United States war crimes, they might be a little more apt to consider what you're sending them. So I'm not going to tell you what to say and what not to say. Let it just come organically from you. But at the same time, I just ask you be polite about it, because we're not going to make friends, or, well, we're not going to get Julian free if all we do is just scream in people's faces, which has its time and has its places. But in this particular moment of history, I personally feel like educating people is much more powerful than simply yelling at them for not knowing what's going on or being willfully ignorant to what's going on.
Right, exactly. And there are so many things that you can do. Also, I think it's important to keep reiterating the sorts of activism and the certain actions that we have engaged in ourselves. For example, Andrew and I, last summer in 2019, we went to a festival in in the town that we live in, and we were able to really speak to people there, just average people just like us, and ask them if they knew who Julian Assange was, and ask them if they knew about WikiLeaks and the certain revelations that we have learned through WikiLeaks. And many people were unaware of what was happening. And when we spoke with them and we told them precisely what was happening to this man, people were shocked, and many people were willing to take our signs, were willing to watch the vigil and get our contact information to become involved and to learn more. You'll be really, really surprised at how many people are receptive to the message. And the reason why we were able to be successful with this is because we did approach people kindly. And at first, I think myself, I thought people would be hostile towards me, but honestly, they were not. People were very receptive to the message. So, go out with your friends, go and do this. You don't have to do this alone. And I know that I guess right now it's not really the easiest time to do these sorts of actions, but as the world gets back to normal, we can start to engage in these certain actions. And also, as Andrew was saying, because of this time that we're in right now, where many people are fearful to leave their homes and are being told that they cannot leave their homes, taking these measures from your house is very important and very effective. But if you are in a place where you do feel comfortable going out in public and taking on these actions, it's a really great opportunity, especially during this very critical time. As of now, we believe that this hearing is going to take place in May. Now, that could change literally tomorrow. We are not sure. We will keep our eye out on this to keep you guys posted as to what's going on with this court hearing. It could very well be postponed. And yeah, we'll just continue to keep you updated on that. So if you guys do have any questions for us about these initiatives that we've been discussing, please do leave us some comments in the chat. Now, I see that we are joined by our first guest of the evening, former CIA officer and co-founder of VIPS, Ray McGovern, is joining us once again. He's a friend of the Vigils and a supporter of Julian Assange. Ray, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing? Ray, hi. Are you able to hear me? Is he muted? No?
He's not muted, but I think he's still connecting. His image just
Okay.
froze.
Are you there, Ray?
Hi, I just, sorry. Hey, your beard is looking good.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Andrew, right?
Yeah, how are you today, Mr. McGovern?
Well, I'm a little late and I apologize for that. It's good to see you all and good work you've done the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I just want to say a wizard's never late. He arrives right when he intends to. So, if you could, a little bit, because I believe the last time we left off was actually speaking about the subpoena you had received.
Yeah.
If you could you talk about, give a quick backstory about what it is and then any updates about the case?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of lawsuits going on having to do with the speculation that Seth Rich was the person who was involved in getting the DNC emails to WikiLeaks. And right now, there's been a real crescendo. And it's partly because there are at least 3, maybe 4 lawsuits that I'm aware of. But it's also because the whole case about Russian hacking has fallen into disrepair. That's the nicest way I could say it. You'll recall that the Mueller report talked about 2 gross interferences by the Russians. The first one he mentioned was the Internet Research Agency, and that this was polluting all our minds, even though Facebook and others determined that the amount of ads or postings that the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg put on during and after the election, the number that they put on was, now, if you have a pencil, you might copy this down, .000000024% of all the such traffic on Facebook. So I think that came down to maybe one American in hundreds was likely to see one of those Russian ads. And that was supposed to be a big deal, that they were toying with our democracy, they're trying to destroy it, cause all kinds of dissension, and make it possible for Trump to beat Hillary. So that one's gone down the drain. And I'll tell you, it's an interesting thing here, and it's relevant to your question. When these things get into a court of law, the standards are different. You know, like they like to have evidence. Uh, I mean, Bill Binney has always said, "Okay, don't believe us. Don't believe us, even though we can prove from forensics that there was no hack by Russia or by anybody else. Don't believe us. Wait until we get into the courts, and then it'll come out." And he's right. So what happened? Well, this Internet Research Agency and its so-called accomplices were indicted by Mueller. Now, there's an old saying that you can indict a ham sandwich in this country, and that saying tends to be true. Now, who was indicted? Well, these people connected with the Internet Research Agency, responsible for all these postings on Facebook and elsewhere, which determined the election for Donald Trump. That's what people wanted you to believe. That's what Mueller wanted you to believe. Now, what happened? Well, there was a court case, and all of a sudden, the Russians hired a lawyer here, and they said, "Okay, uh, let's have discovery. What kind of evidence is there that this was the Russian government?" I mean, we think it was a bunch of hacks and a bunch of people trying to peddle things. Show us that was the Russian government. And the government came back and said, the U.S. government, um, we can't show you that. We don't have any information on that. So the judge said, "Yeah, but Bob Mueller said Russia." Oh, yeah, he did say Russia, didn't he? The judge says, "Look, if you can't prove it was the Russians, get out of here." No, he said that to the U.S. attorneys. The U.S. attorneys went back, and now how many months later? That was July. So, let's say 7 or 8 months later, just yesterday or a couple of days ago, we learned that the Department of Justice are not going to sue these people in the Internet Research Agency. They just want to indict them. They don't. They don't want to try to convict them. Why? Because they can't prove that it was Russia, like the Russian government, behind all those ads and all those other things. So that was the first of two major things that Bob Mueller issued in his findings. The second, of course, was the Russian hacking of the DNC computers. Now, we know that for some strange reason, the head of the FBI, James Comey, neglected to. Oh, sorry about that. Let me turn this off here. Awfully sorry. That James Comey, when the DNC said we've been hacked, it's the Russians, the Russians are coming, and it's an act of war. John McCain, it's an act of war by Russia. Okay. James Comey, for some strange reason, didn't say, "Okay, I'll send my people in to take a look at those computers. Let's learn how this was done." No, he didn't do that. What did he do? Well, he said, "Hillary and her associates, they're pretty pleased, would like to look at the computers." And the DNC is alleged to have said, "No, you can't. And the story that is fostered here in Washington is that Comey said, "Oh gosh, the DNC won't let us look at their computer." But the DNC said, "Oh, we get this crackerjack outfit, CrowdStrike. We'll hire them, and they'll share with the FBI what they have." Okay, well, number one, it's not a crackerjack outfit, and number two, there's no reason in God's creation that the head of the FBI wouldn't say, look, Hillary, sorry about that. Here's a warrant. Here's a judge's signature. We're seizing those computers. You say it's Russia? This is really important. McCain says it's a war. It's really important. So we're seizing a computer. He didn't do that. So up until, well, for the last 3 years, they've been saying, well, CrowdStrike, it was really good and then gave us all the information. Well, in another lawsuit, this one with Roger Stone, Bill Binney, a good friend of mine, said, well, ask them for the proof. Ask them to prove there was a Russian hack. And so they did. And there was no proof. And so worse than that, worse than that from CrowdStrike's point of view, just a couple of days ago, as some of you may know, a CrowdStrike has said, well, you know, not only did we not give James Comey a final report, whoa, they didn't give it. He satisfied himself with a couple of drafts, redacted at that? Well, apparently so. He hasn't denied that. So we didn't give him a final report. And besides that, you know, we never said that we looked very much into examining or investigating how it was done. We just investigated what was done. And so, you know, all this business about saying the CrowdStrike showed it was the Russians, well, that kind of falls into disrepair. My God. My God. Now, has this been in the press? Well, one of them has. The New York Times was so embarrassed that it ran one of those stories the day before yesterday. But this is amazing. So what I'm saying here is that the whole business of Russian hacking, for those who know or those who know where to get information, has fallen apart. So where does that leave? Well, could Bill Binney and our technical directors from NSA, former, could they be right that it was an insider, that there was no evidence of a hack, that contrary-wise, there's good evidence that it was copied onto a thumb drive, given to Julian Assange or WikiLeaks or whoever did it that way? Wow, that looks like it's it's more likely now with CrowdStrike disavowing its former stuff and with the Internet Research Agency going poof. So what does that mean? Well, who is the insider? I mean, who is the DNC insider? Well, the candidate list is not very long. Julian Assange himself mentioned Seth Rich. He disavowed saying, you know, he was my source, but, you know, when you offer $20,000 for the reward for whoever gives you information leading to Seth Rich, then, you know, there's kind of I've never seen Julian do that before. That was certainly a clue. So the top of the list sits Seth Rich. Now, this is very embarrassing to the Democrats, very embarrassing to James Comey and all the people who are wedded to this notion that the Russians hacked. And so there's a full court press in the courts, to make sure that nobody says that Seth Rich was responsible. That's why I got subpoenaed. I told you, actually, I was on with you all the day that I got subpoenaed the first time. And
Yeah.
I've been subpoenaed another time now in a more intrusive subpoena for a court case going out there in Dallas, Texas. It's even more comprehensive. And I wrote back, I said, look, you must be kidding. I don't even know half of these people. A third of them I never even heard of. You want me all my correspondence of these people? So they relented and said, oh, just give us what you gave the first people. So what I'm saying here is that there's a extreme sensitivity on the part of the riches. And of course, you know, they don't have all this money. Who's financing this? My guess is that it's the Democratic National Committee. That's the people who just can't abide the thought that their carefully constructed but full of holes legend about a Russian hack is about to fall apart. So they're in it full time. And this fellow Butowski, who's suing and being sued, is going to be in the news for the next year or so as this thing drags through the courts. But as Bill Binney said, the truth will come out. And Binney has issued a couple of affidavits in connection with the Roger Stone case, which the judge would not allow into evidence, even though it hit the core of the thing. And And so we'll have to see how that comes out. So the subpoenas, I didn't get away with my first response, uh, which was uh, which wrapped up all the evidence as to why it wasn't the Russians, but it was somebody else. But so we sent a bunch of things. My computer person and I sent a bunch of things to that first one. We'll do the same for the second. But all I'm saying here is that the thing is really coming to a head, and that all these lawsuits are very curious in nature because there's an apoplectic kind of reaction to any notion that if it wasn't a Russian hack, if CrowdStrike disavows what it said in the past, if the Internet Research Agency cannot be proven to have been under the Russian government, my God, it's got to be an insider. And who is that insider? There's one prime suspect, and we know who that is. And that's, I think, why the Democrats, who must be financing all this stuff, the rich family is not rich, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know. So there's a full court press going on, and that was the first part of my subpoena. I see Susie has joined us. Susie, good to see you.
Hi, Grandpa. You're looking very grandpa at the moment. You've kept the beard.
Well, it's almost
Tell us
almost
about
a
it.
year. It's almost a year since April 11th, you know. So I'm hoping to be able to trim it off as soon as Julian gets released, which I expect will be the end of May.
Will you tell the story about what moved you to grow the beard?
Say again?
Please, will you tell the story about the beard?
Oh, well, these folks know it pretty well, but I'll repeat it for our audience. And that is simply that when Julian was unceremoniously dragged out of the embassy there on the 11th of April last year, he looked pretty disheveled. He looked pretty unkempt. Maybe not quite as bad as, not quite as disheveled as this, but he looked pretty bad. And I said, you know, how can I express some sort of solidarity with Julian, something that will remind me of him, something that will remind me to think of him, and maybe lift a prayer every now and then that that he'll be safe and he will not be prompted to commit suicide. And I just decided, well, I'd look as disheveled as Julian, unkempt, and when people, you know, when kempt people, I don't know what is kempt an adjective. When I run into kempt people who look at me and they go, well, I said, what are you doing so unkempt? I say, like, who was it? Ralph Waldo Emerson was told by the fellow in jail. So what are you doing out there? You know, what are you doing out there? That's another story. But yeah, that's the story of that. I did want to inject a little special interest item in here, and that goes back 10 years ago, and it has to do with the question, if WikiLeaks were up and running before September 11th, 2001, could 9/11 have been prevented? And when I say 10 years ago, well, now I don't want to monopolize the conversation. If you have others or other things you want to talk about first, I'm fine with that. Do you want me
I've
to?
got a ton of questions. Sorry to butt in. I've got a ton of questions I would really like to ask you, Ray. But just on the beard, quickly, we actually discovered that Julian had his razors taken away from him months prior to him being expelled from the Ecuadorian embassy, that it was actually a deliberate agenda on the part of Ecuador in cahoots with the US for Julian to look as unkempt as possible. They actually prevented him from shaving. They prevented him from having access to someone who could shave him. So that was just yet another example of exactly how premeditated it was.
Ray, you did mention that you believe that Julian may be released at the end of May. Can you explain why you feel that way?
Well, it's more a hope than an expectation. After the first day of hearings, wrote an article which started out saying, now we're going to see whether the British judicial system is so subservient to the United States that it will take any diktat offered. We know, of course, that before the war in Iraq, the Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith, had ruled that an attack without UN approval would be illegal. And then 20 lawyers from the White House descended upon him, and then he changed his mind. He said, "Oh, yeah, I suppose it's legal, you know." And that's what Blair told his cabinet. Well, here's another example, an even more awful example of the U.S. sitting in the court there. I mean, there are several people from the embassy right there, as you probably know, and they have hired this Queen's counselor, whatever that means, and he's making up stuff. And the first thing he said was, "Now look, there have been really serious damage and injury and deaths due to these revelations, like in Afghanistan and Iraq." And everybody kind of listened to that and said, "Okay." Nobody rebutted it because the defense had their chance the next day. But I wrote this thing because I remember when all these things happened, when they went down and the evidence was out in the ether, thanks to WikiLeaks, and there were all kinds of recriminations, all kinds of accusations saying, "Oh, this is going to be terrible for our soldiers or for the people working for the U.S. and Afghanistan and Iraq." And it got so bad that the head of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, Carl Levin, called the defense secretary, his name was Robert Gates, and said, "Mr. Gates, would you give us a memo on what damage that has caused to our troops, those who worked with us, and so forth in Afghanistan, Iraq?" And Gates came back and said, "Look, I've heard all these reports, and they're quote a fairly, let's see, uh, fairly." It was the word was exaggerated, but it was a much better word. It'll come to my mind. In other words, Gates himself, the head of the Defense Department, uh, the uh, the ruling general or the general in charge of Afghanistan and in Iraq, had all said not one soldier had been as much as spit upon as a result of the revelation of the overwrought is the word. Okay, so fairly substantially overwrought. Those were the three wonderful words that Defense Secretary Gates used. These reports, Mr. Levin, head of the Senate Armed Services Committee, these reports are, quote, fairly significantly overwrought. Now, how does that square? How does that square with what the Queen's counselor, representing the prosecution here in Assange's case, said about all this terrible damage, people gone missing, people blah, blah, blah. And then he carefully said at the end, but I have to say that the United States has no proof of this. All they know is that 100 people they used to work with disappeared, but they don't know what happened to them. But so they're not prepared to argue that it was a direct result of this, but it happened. And that, that's how bad it was. So all I'm saying here is that it's so egregiously obvious that the British are toadies, poodles, whatever you want to say, of the US in this. With the accumulation of protests from doctors and from everybody else, I think there is a chance. I think there is a chance that Julian will come out of this all right. And as I say, that's more a hope than an expectation. But, we can't lose hope. And that's why we're here, I guess, tonight.
I share that. Actually, I have also had the feeling that he may be let out. Do you think that coronavirus gives them an excuse?
Well, it gives everyone an excuse to do whatever they want to do, actually. And yeah, it could. You mean in the sense of keeping him cooped up, or maybe letting him out, or what do you think?
Quite the opposite. So there's been prisoner releases in Ohio. There's discussions of prisoner releases in the UK. The releases in the States so far have been around non-violent offenders. Julian is a non-violent offender, obviously. So I'm wondering if Corona would give them a way to save face, so that rather than Julian being seen to be victorious, or rather than them having to answer, the UK having to answer to the USA as they otherwise might have to if they were to let him go, I was wondering if Corona gives them the perfect opportunity to actually let him out and kind of no fault either way basis.
Well, again, that's a nice hope. Everything I know about the British, and I go back a ways, there were generations that came from Ireland, and my uncles tasted of British justice. So I just, I just don't think the British will be able to resist what the U.S. wants them to do. Of course, it's always possible that Trump will become so odious in the eyes of even the British that they'll. But I don't know. I'm just hoping for a Deus ex machina, which is, as you know, the old in the Greek tragedies, if the hero gets really, really in trouble, perhaps you don't know this. The Deus was the god, right? Ex machina came out of a machine, so they would have a machine on stage or behind stage, and it would literally lift the hero out of danger, and that would be the end of the show. So Deus ex machina is what we need, and I'm hopeful that something like that will happen. And I had to keep praying and hoping that that'll be the case, but it's more of a hope than an expectation right now.
There has definitely been a massive increase in protest activity in support of Julian across particularly the last 6 months. We've also seen the support base move from the grassroots into the professional class, obviously with the UN and the European MPs, but also with the doctors and now lawyers for Assange and everything else. What's your take on that, Ray? The changing tides of the support for Julian?
Well, I look to the Australian government most first and foremost, and what a what a disgrace. The old Roman times. Paul, Apostle Paul, could argue, "Civus Romanus sum." I'm a Roman citizen. If you want to do something to me, you got to take me to Rome, which they had to do, of course. Now, it meant something to be a Roman citizen in those days. It meant something at some time to be a British citizen or a citizen of Australia. But the Australians are certainly not living up to their duties toward this very famous and very well decorated, so to speak, with all kinds of awards for his work. Now, that's what bothers me the most. I take great encouragement from the lawyers and the doctors and the others that are speaking up, and I sign every petition that comes across my desk. But we'll have to see. There has to be some sort of Deus ex machina, and when we all get together next time, maybe we'll know what that is.
God, that would be an amazing, amazing thing to celebrate, but it'd also be an amazing thing for this world
Oh yeah.
in many,
Well,
many ways.
yeah.
Tell me this, Ray, what do you think Julian would be saying about the current situation?
The current situation with
The global situation, the martial law in multiple states, the millions of people in either self or forced isolation. I mean, to be honest with you, sitting in exile, it kind of feels like the rest of the world is starting to catch up with the exiles, because I hear people saying, I can't travel. And we're like, oh, okay, I know what that feels like. Or I'm in self-isolation at home. Yeah, I know what that feels like. But there seems to be a mass trauma occurring amongst the global population. And then there also seems to be the state fully really willing and able to capitalize on that in terms of increasing the severity of restrictions upon civil liberties.
Mhm. Well, I identify with that. Just today, I was thinking, here I am, cooped up in this house. My wife and I can't go out. We have food delivered, which we're able to do, which is good. Isn't this inconvenient? And then I think, McGovern, what planet do you come from here? Think about Julian, for God's sake. Make,
Exactly.
you know, wow. At least
Exactly.
I'm able to roam around here and even go outside if I want to just not meet anybody. But there's Julian, old. Well, you know the story. So yeah, this consciousness will be new for a lot of people, especially Americans. And the whole business is about states of emergency and martial law. Well, that's a pretty slippery slope. And once you invoke that kind of thing, there are all manner of things that you can do to prevent dissent and to do other things.
Do you think we're heading into the next Great Depression? I mean, JP Morgan said today, first quarter 2020 will be negative 4% US GDP, second quarter will be negative 14%. Is
Yeah.
that really what we're looking at right now?
Well, I never pretended to know anything about economics or even the financial market, but it does look like we're in for a big recession at very least. And, you know, what I have to do is repress the urge toward what the Germans call Schadenfreude. I don't have any money. I don't have any stocks or bonds or anything. And, what I have is in a bank account, not very much, but it's enough. And for all these people for whom enough is never enough is never enough, they're going to take it on the chin. And of course, the way things will work out will be the same thing as the failure of the banks back in 2008, 2009. When they fix things, it'll be the people like us that will suffer. It'll be the institutions themselves that will be put back into good health with our tax money. So, yeah, it looks pretty bad. There's kind of what they call a perfect storm brewing. The Ebola, the um,
SARS.
banks, and the other
Mm.
thing is, the what I call the national security state, the deep state. Now, just a word on that. Trump himself has named the people that should be in jail, and he has said these people should be in jail. Comey, Brennan, Clapper.
Mm.
It's amazing. Of course they should be, but they have ways to, with the help of the media, to argue against that kind of thing. And just as things are coming to a head with the John Durham investigation, which Bill Barr, the Attorney General, said would be completed this spring, I don't know if it'll be completed this spring. And I don't know if Trump, you've heard me say this before, whether he has the guts, even though he has chapter and verse on these guys. I mean, they were so sure that Hillary was going to win, they didn't even hide their tracks. And
Mm.
even after she lost, they kept the thing going, as probably you know. So they have the goods in these guys. The question will be: will Trump fold? Will he cop out? Will he believe what he's been told? You don't mess with the intelligence community. If I were a betting man, I would say that's probably the way it's going to come out. And the Ebola thing and the financial crisis could serve as some sort of a cover, or at least a obfuscation for letting these guys off with a tap on the wrist, slap on the wrist.
So while
Brennan
we're
has got I'm so sorry, Andrew. Brennan has got so much blood on his hands. Has there ever been a CIA director jailed? I mean, they say many times about the presidents that a president will always forgive the sins of the former president or even pardon them because they're feathering their own nest for the future, right? When the next president comes in, is it the same with CIA directors? Is there any history, any established precedent of intelligence chiefs in the US specifically being held to account for crimes?
The answer is no. But the extended answer is that there is one example of a CIA director who told the truth, who testified to Congress about the crimes of the 50s and 60s, all this drug usage and trying to kill Castro and all that kind of stuff. And he wasn't pardoned, he was killed. He was murdered. His name is Bill Colby. I worked directly under him. And he was drowned in a boating canoe accident there right out in Maryland. And I've looked into that recently, and I'm convinced that these guys got him. He was pretty much expecting it. He said so. He said, I don't want any security around me. If they're going to get me, they're going to get me. And they did. So all I'm saying is that it's really worse than no one facing the courts or no one being held to account. I mean, Gina Haspel, the head of the CIA now, is well known to have run the first torture site, the black site in Thailand, where waterboarding occurred. They all knew that. The senators that approved her nomination to be head of the CIA, they all knew that. Okay.
They call her Bloody Gina, like
Yeah,
it's a pet name.
That's what she was known, and John Kiriakou has told us that. So
I actually remember the famous tweet by WikiLeaks, or the famous information that got released of the torture reports written by Gina Haspel in the form of autoerotic fiction, or autoerotic like fan fiction. Like she was writing her reports describing the beads of sweat dripping off their abs and shit like that. So the fact that she is even allowed to still exist in a free and open society just shows that we're not a free and open society.
yeah, well, I was at that hearing where she was the nomination was sent forward, and I couldn't abide sitting there and seeing all the senators, including the Democratic senators, sort of giving her a pass. And so I intervened and said, beg your pardon for interrupting, but you all know that she ran that first torture descended upon.
Oh, it looks like Ray's connection's frozen up for a second.
But
That's
actually,
absolutely fascinating. What he just said, I'm blown away. I did not know that there was a CIA director who was a whistleblower, or that he was killed for it. Did you guys know that?
I did not know that.
Colby. That's
Yeah.
a name to. That is a name to look up.
While we're waiting for Ray to come back, I'd like your opinion on this, Susie. Jimmy Dore did an extensive piece last night and has released a lot of videos about it. The Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden were encouraging voters to still go out to the polls amidst the pandemic that's going on right now. The day before and a couple days before that, he was releasing videos showing how polling locations were getting closed across the state. So essentially what happened is the Democratic Party closed primary polling locations and then still encouraged people to go to those locations and vote. And there's a video of a little old woman sitting outside of a polling station in Illinois talking about how there's been elderly people crammed together in this room for 3 to 6 hours, or like I think it was 2 to 3 hours, waiting to vote. And I was just wondering if there's any like recourse or legal action that would be taken from intentionally asking people to contaminate themselves by not closing down polling locations and encouraging them to go to polling sites when there is a pandemic actively going on. Because I know in some countries, spreading the pandemic intentionally is a crime. And I was just wondering if you knew about anything, maybe US law, that would criminalize that.
I wouldn't have the first clue about US law, but my only comments on that front would be two things, which the second might not be very popular. The first one is that the DNC doesn't give a shit about anybody except themselves. That's what it comes down to. They don't care whether you get a disease or don't get a disease. I don't even think they care whether you vote or you don't vote, because at the end of the day, they're going to pick whoever they want to, regardless of who votes for whoever. So I really don't think it matters a whole lot to them. Of course, it matters to people who are impacted on the ground. People are affected on the ground, but I don't think it matters to the institution of the DNC whatsoever. And then the second thing I would mention is that I spent 4 hours of my life watching Hillary's recent propaganda documentary last week, which, while I had to grit my teeth through a lot of it, had some very, very enlightening stuff in there. For example, when her team's talking to her about whether or not Bernie's a threat, and she says Bernie is a career politician. This is just his shtick. all of this, like, I'm for the people, I'm a socialist, free everything for everyone stuff is a shtick. He's a career politician. He'll take the money and he'll sell out at the moment when it counts. That was Hillary's analysis during the 20s, like in I should give context. In the documentary, they're filming her run up to the 2016 election. She knew Bernie would roll over for her months and months and months before he did. She had his number from the outset. She knew. She's openly saying he's in it for the money. At the end of the day, he'll take the money. And every single time you see Bernie is getting cheated, Bernie, this is happening to Bernie, that's happening to Bernie, Bernie says one of two things. He either says, I will vote, I will side with whoever the Democratic nominee is. Or the second thing he says is, donate money to my campaign, give me more money, 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 money. These are the two things that you consistently hear out of Bernie, when he should be saying, I'm being cheated, this is a fraud, this party is a crock, we have to tear it down, we need an alternative. He's not saying these things. He's saying, I'm going to side with whoever is the Democratic nominee and give me money. Now, do people not listen to what he says? I mean, do they not like put two and two together and go, oh, hang on a second, maybe he's saying I'll vote for whoever the nominee is because he knows it's not going to be him and he doesn't give a toss whether it's him or not because he's already got his plan to cash out and vote for the nominee. And he's saying, give me money, money. Why is he saying I will vote for whoever the nominee is and give me money? Like that, these things are not compatible. If you're actually trying to be the nominee, okay, fine. But you're already saying, oh yeah, I'll go with whoever gets it. But give me money, give me money, give me money. And it amazes me that I feel like people conflate what Bernie's supporters want, what his base wants, what his movement wants, with what Bernie wants. They assume that because all of his supporters and his movement want A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that Bernie wants that. What Bernie wants is to continue his happy life as a career politician and to do so in a way that is both smooth and profitable. That's what Bernie wants. And I'm really sorry because I'd just like to add one caveat to that, and that's that I actually wish he was real. I wish he was real. I wish it was all real. I wish that all those people given hope and working on his movement, busting their asses every day, all those activists, I wish it was for something other than a repeat of 2016. But that's not the case. And the writing is right there on the wall. And if you want to go watch Hillary's stupid propaganda documentary, she says it right there, months before he rolled over in 2016.
So we are now also streaming on Jason Burma's channel. So to Jason Burma's audience, I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. You are watching the Action for Assange, Free Assange Vigil. Jason, I see you nodding your head as Susie was talking about Bernie Sanders. I see that it's got you really fired up and you have a response. So Jason, thank you so much for joining us. You're a returning guest on the Vigil. So I do want to give you the opportunity to respond, and then I'll open it up to the other guests and my co-hosts.
Well, I think Susie just killed it. I mean, it was basically what I've been saying for months now. The man didn't have, the wherewithal to stand up when he actually won in 2016. So what did we actually expect? He said he was aware of the Assange issue. He never commented on it once. He refused to really discuss the obvious collusion of the Democratic National chair getting everybody to back Biden, an openly senile man that on both sides of the media spectrum, nobody is saying, hey, by the way, he has visible dementia. I mean, this is the world we're living in. I don't trust the voting we're getting. And at this time, we have a verifiable crisis where people are panicking, where polling places are being closed and elections are openly being talked about being suspended. Where is this guy on these issues? He's nowhere to be found. But I got to say, the biggest issue now, of course, at least regarding Assange, is as this global lockdown goes throughout the world, right? It's a global lockdown at this point. We're seeing dominoes fall everywhere. Well, guess what? There's prison riots. And we've got our first positive test over at Rikers Island. So now, when you have doctors screaming and shouting that this is a very dangerous place for him to be, and we have the court system openly announcing that any kind of trial that lasts over 3 days probably isn't going to take place, what are we waiting for? Let's get this guy out of there, because you can bet if they smell one snifter of the kind of prison riot we saw in Italy and Belmarsh, they're not just going to let Assange walk out the front door. They may let every other prisoner out of that place. But Assange, I promise you, will not be one of them.
We also just found out that the UK had their first confirmed case of the coronavirus in the prison system. Andrew mentioned earlier, I had a show last night with a gentleman named Jeff Black. He had just started a campaign to release all nonviolent prisoners in the US. There's, yeah, Jason just nailed it. There's no reason that Julian Assange should still be incarcerated, if at all. Eh, if he's not repatriated, he at least needs to be able to go to a facility where there's competent people who can give him the care that he's been needing for about the last year. Yeah, this is it should be just as obvious as don't run a candidate who has dementia, but we're not. I guess we're not in that timeline. I don't know. What do you think, Ray?
I'm hopeful that this opportunity uh, would allow people to think about what happens to Julian. Again, I'm so down on the British judicial system and its ability or its willingness to sort of bend to U.S. diktat, that I think you're probably right that everyone will be allowed out except Julian.
And let's talk about that for a minute, because it seems like already, let's talk about this in my state of New York. Forget about the bail reform. They're openly saying they're going to let prisoners out in certain districts. Okay, the panic hasn't set in where the full economic impacts are going to be felt throughout the country. So is that CO going to keep showing up to a job that becomes increasingly dangerous, not only to catch this supposed virus, but because of an uprising in the prison system? I must admit, Ray, I was super surprised to see Hammond and Manning released. Does that give us maybe a glimmer of hope that somebody is going to do the right thing and let Assange out? Or do they basically burn it down? I mean, this would be a great opportunity for one of those privatized intelligence services that was looking to snatch him up or poison him or make it look like an accident to do so, no?
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right. It's kind of hard to predict what's going to happen, but I think that the new agitation in favor of Julian is the only thing we can do, and that's what we're doing here. But I think to the degree we can give a lot of play to what the doctors and what the lawyers and what the other people are saying about Julian's condition, that's all to the good.
So, what is your take on why, in short order, basically Manning and Hammond were released? What do you think the levers of power that turn so quickly? Why is that?
That's hard to say. I just don't know. I'm no expert on domestic politics here, and people keep asking me to say things more profound than the next person, and I have to beg off on that one. I don't know.
So I got to ask you then, Ray, while we're in the midst of this now, what is forget about me calling it a global pandemic. That's what's in the news. That's what's being portrayed. What is your best advice to American citizens? I mean, you're a former intelligence analyst of 26 years. What would you tell a guy like me? How would you tell me to prepare?
Yeah. My son is a doctor, and he sent around a kind of a cheat sheet about what people should do. But anyone who's been watching TV uh, or online will know that you're supposed to, wash your hands and stay away from other people. It's not just a couple of feet; it's 6 feet maybe. Until things clarify. Apparently, this stuff is so noxious that it can be sprayed, or it's aerosol type stuff. So I don't really know, but people are getting good advice from all this, and who knows? The Chinese seem to have a leg up, at least in Hunan, and if that's, well, of course there are differences in the way people have reacted and with the speed with which they've reacted. So who knows what's going to happen? This is sui generis. I mean, this not happened before, at least in my 80 years, and Americans are not used to it. So everything is pretty unpredictable at this point, and people are really scared. Um,
While we're on the topic of the coronavirus, because there's something that personally horrifies me, and if I mean Susie or you, Ray, could weigh in on this. Um, Throughout human history, there is verifiable evidence that governments have used crises to target political dissidents in their solutions to said crises. Um, do you think that I'll call them the dissident class, the people that are vocal and speaking out and trying to change the system, whether it's on a YouTube show or in the streets, should take some type of adequate measure to prepare themselves for the situation where the governments roll out camps into the now vacant and barren supermarkets and big box stores throughout the country? Because it seems to me like there's this pre-built infrastructure in the failings of our global economic system that's left vacant buildings that are in some cases acres large that they could put human beings into. um, should we as dissidents be worried about the government response, and if we should be, what should we do about it?
well, I guess it all depends on where we are. Here in the U.S., people who speak out are already in danger. John Kiriakou was arrested on the street, and they charged him with stuff that they made up, and it's come out now in court that he was not guilty of what they're saying. Other people have been harassed. Uh, all kinds of folks, people who are journalists and others. So I just don't know what to say, except that this creates another opportunity for that to happen. And, what happens to people in the FBI and elsewhere when they continue to serve under people like they did under Comey and the others? I'm afraid they will salute smartly and do what they're told. So that's especially troubling, and that goes for the local police as well. So, yeah, one should be more careful, but I'm already being careful. And as you know, Gina Haspel already knocked me off this program once. We'll just wait until she knocks me off again.
Well,
My
I do
take
want
on
to talk
that.
about some of the things that are obviously just being talked about. Trump, what they're asking today will be mandated tomorrow. For instance, social gatherings of 10 or less. That kind of makes protest impossible. That makes gathering impossible. We know that big tech companies and the White House met over 4 weeks ago. Why? To control information. They discussed this. YouTube has openly said that they'll be taking more videos down via bots because they can't just manually review them. They're understaffed. So things that don't go against um, their guidelines can also be censored. I think this is what's frightening. We can already see the lockdowns in place. De Blasio, less than 48 hours ago, said that they would make a decision to lock down New York City or self-isolate. Again, it will be less enforced at first, but it will be fully enforced later. I truly believe that New Rochelle is no more a hotspot in New York than any other place. They clearly used selective testing to bottleneck off the city. That's clearly right there by the Cuomo Bridge, the Washington Bridge, and the Lincoln Tunnel, as to not panic people. I just think our country, what's left of it, Ray, unfortunately, is going to be unrecognizable in the next 1 to 2 months. And I don't know what we get back, because when these people have taken power, executive action, for instance, we've never gotten those rights back. And Cuomo himself put cyber attacks in this latest bill that was passed without question. It seems like now the coronavirus equals hurricanes, equals floods, equals natural disasters, equals unforeseen cyber attacks, and anything else they want to put. Can the genie ever go back in the bottle after this? And this is for Ray or Susie.
I would just say that you can't take what's happening now in isolation, because this is not something that's just happening in 2020. This has been an entire decade of legislation being introduced that encroaches upon civil liberties and in extremely dangerous ways. The NDAA, for example, which Chris Hedges and others fought all the way to the Supreme Court, but unfortunately were deemed to not have standing and therefore did not win the case. The National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, I believe it was, allowed the indefinite detention of American citizens. The drone program has assassinated American citizens overseas. So you have these really horrible precedents, and then you add mass surveillance on top of that. And on it goes. I mean, I recently did a study of security legislation that had been passed in my home country of New Zealand, and every single year of the last decade, a new bill or act was passed through Parliament, usually under urgency, within very short periods of time, that directly impact civil liberties, restrict civil liberties, and further empower the government and the intelligence agencies to take actions against citizens. And those bills are not, don't just pertain to New Zealand. There are equivalent pieces of legislation right across the Western world. So this has been it's been a long, slow walk across the decade to get to this point. And it seems that now we are really at the 11th hour, if not the 12th hour.
Well, when you talked about, people that are disclosing information and documentation like the NDAA, now we have this new counterintelligence 2020 to 2022, which associates what? Al Qaeda, ISIS, Iran, Hezbollah, public disclosure organizations, hacktivists, leaktivists. Well, for instance, am I now a public disclosure organization? Because none of the media is printing this thing from the Association of American Railroads, where they are getting documentation for their infrastructure for your papers, please, at what? Containment and quarantine areas in America. Haven't seen this one published. I'll be the first to publish it because people know. Does that make me a hacktivist? Does that make me a leaktivist? I didn't write this. This is real. I'm not censoring it. It shouldn't be censored. People should know what they're in for. And 2020 already looks so much different than 2019. I really wonder where we're headed. Steve, do you have any ideas? Because I know that you have great insight over at Slow News Day.
Well, what they're doing right now is trying to pass something called the Earn It Act, which will kill end-to-end encryption for us. Every single message that goes out digitally instantly gets surveilled before it transmits. The guise is it's for the children. That's how they're billing it. It's to protect the kids. You're right when you say once this goes to the executive order level, once this gets put on the books, we don't get those rights back. I just threw it in the chat, but we're obligated to dissent. It's something that we have to do peacefully, but often, and to the point to where it becomes one of those waves. It's supposed to only take 3.5% of the population to enact a little bit of change. I think that we're witnessing 12th hour status for what little liberties we do have left here. So I hope we respond accordingly.
Well, I mean, at this point, I don't think there's any doubt this is a global, transformative human event. This is 1929 meets 1984 meets 9/11 in the slow rollout. I mean, it's got all the flavors. Today, you had Trump talking about FDR wartime movement, but then denying it would be as bad as the Great Depression. Yet, yesterday, talking about how this was worse for the airline industry than 9/11. The stock market floor will not open tomorrow. It is online trading only, and that means eventually that will be closed. Once the bank runs happen, what happens? We are in complete uncharted territory, and I just hope people are prepared. I mean, I hope and pray that somehow there is some kind of positive outcome on this, and I hope and pray that we can get Assange out of that prison system before all hell breaks loose, as we're seeing in Italy. That is a first world nation. People should be taking note. Is there anybody that disagrees with me that we shouldn't be heeding the warnings of Italy at this point? I guess that's
Crickets.
no. Susie?
Crickets. That's all I said. Crickets. Of course, we should learn from those who are weeks or into months ahead of us on the trajectory that most of the Western world is currently following very closely. I think Germany and France are not that far behind Italy, looking at the numbers coming out. I mean, I have many concerns about this corona situation. If I can cut back just for a second, I think this might be really beneficial for you, and I'd love to get Ray's comment on it as well. And that's if I can just quickly share screen. I will show you, this is the security legislation that was passed in New Zealand across the last decade. So we have, these are the bills and the years that they were passed, and then this is just a one sentence description of each bill, and I think it's worth going through. And you can find this on protectsusie.com under timelines if anyone's interested in going and having a look for yourself. In 2012, the Search and Surveillance Act was passed, which was a dramatic expansion of surveillance powers for many government agencies. Even agencies like the Department of Fisheries were given surveillance powers, for example. Basically, all government agencies got surveillance powers under this act. It also changed the right to silence, even for press, so that journalists in New Zealand no longer have a right to silence. In 2013, the famous GCSB bill was passed, which forced every ISP internet service provider in New Zealand to create backdoors in their systems for the government, spy agencies, to access. They also deputized internet service provider staff to work for the spies to facilitate the transfer of the private information of their customers, and legalized mass surveillance of New Zealanders. In 2014, the Countering Terrorist Fighters Bill enabled warrantless domestic visual surveillance, which means they can actually place video cameras inside your home and film you inside your home without a warrant. And then they can use that information that they gain from that video surveillance to get a warrant. In 2015, there was a new policy introduced, the cybersecurity strategy of 2015. It was devised and introduced by then Prime Minister John Key, who is an ex-New York Federal Reserve Bank member. And it was followed by New Zealand sending their cybersecurity staff to Israel for advanced training. Now, I think you'll find that all of the cybersecurity staff of the Western world have at one point or another been sent to Israel for training or are working closely with them. 2016, the Intelligence and Security Bill allowed sharing of incidentally obtained info with Five Eyes partners, which you might remember as something that Snowden, as part of what Snowden had revealed in his 2013 exposures. And this retroactively, as many of these bills have done, retroactively legalized an illegal, formerly illegal practice that the spy agencies were engaged in. It also outlawed whistleblowing for members of intelligence services in New Zealand, with a minimum of 5 years in jail if they were to blow the whistle on their agencies, and also allowed the government to cancel the passports of national security targets. And that became the Intelligence and Security Act of 2017, which was supposed to be, it was billed as being this major overhaul of the spy services to rein them in, but in fact, lo and behold, it didn't rein them in, it just dramatically expanded their powers and resources. That included the implementation of class-based warrants, which are basically what Americans know as a general warrant, where they can have bulk targeting of multiple citizens, even citizens who aren't connected to each other. For example, they can get a warrant for a location, and then they can surveil and spy on every person or particularly mobile phone that passes through that location. So it's bulk targeting of citizens under one single warrant. Then in 2018, we had the Customs and Excise Act passed, which forced travelers to hand over personal information, passwords, and decryption keys for all of their devices. And now in 2019, we had the most terrifying, probably, the Terrorism Suppression Control Orders Bill of 2019, which allows the police commissioner, not a court, not a judge, not a jury, the police commissioner to arbitrarily apply a control order to any New Zealand citizen, which I've put here a regime of harsh restrictions and monitoring, but actually what it does is they can keep you under house arrest without having force you to be like have an ankle bracelet and be stuck in your house without ever arresting you or charging you or prosecuting you or convicting you of anything. They can put you on home detention. They can decide whether where you can or cannot work, how you can earn money, who you can associate with, who you can communicate with, whether or not you can have internet access. You are gagged, and it's illegal for you to tell anybody that a control order has been applied to you. And any reporter or member of the press who reports on the fact that a control order has been applied to you is subject to a $30,000 fine. That was 2019. Now we're in 2020. So when you take everything that I just covered and then you slap the coronavirus stuff on top of that, tell me where we're at.
So
And the last sentence I'll add to that is that those control orders, they were sold as to be applied to New Zealand citizens who might have been involved in terrorism overseas. When they return to New Zealand, they get these control orders. Of course, we know WikiLeaks had counterterrorism resources used against it and was defined as a terrorist organization. And this week, the New Zealand government put out a blanket call for all New Zealand citizens around the world to return home, any of whom could then be subject to one of these control orders. But continue. Here we are in 2020 with Corona on top of that type of legislative history.
So something, because I'm a solutions-oriented person, and I can't stop the deep state. I can help people proliferate information to do so. But what I can do, and what we've been advocating on this show since the very beginning, is building local power regardless of political ideology. And I didn't want to talk about it on this stream, but I feel like it's really important with the weight of this conversation and with everything going on right now, because the government response from the federal level we're seeing is a slow rollout of testing and the use of the military to do whatever the hell they're gonna slowly start to do. On the local level, though, we have so much power, and people don't realize it, people don't see it, people don't have the ability to possess it or even generally manifest the power of a community. And I'm not talking about sovereign citizens, and I'm not talking about like editing your city charter. I literally mean bringing people together to accomplish goals. So this is just a personal victory. It's the thing I've been doing to keep my spirits up. I reached out to every city, every municipality in my county this week and said, what is our plan for food security as this crisis deepens in the next 3 to 6 months? None of them had an answer. So I called them again and I said, would you be interested in setting up a municipal farming program? Right now, everyone is on space restriction, physical space restriction. We're not allowed to gather. We can't have soccer events. Can we start ripping up the fields, ripping up the green spaces, and start farming as a matter of emergency? Our parks and recreation departments are getting laid off. Can we use them, divert their resources, and have them literally start tilling up all of the green space within our community? And I got a resounding, send me a proposal, what does this look like? I have 5 of the 11 cities in my community that have already discussed this internally and want to move forward with some kind of idea. And I have 1 city in my community that is already identifying locations in conjunction with a city outside of my county that they're going to begin using for municipal farming programs. I've connected with the local beekeepers association to provide pollinating colonies for those farm sites that are going up. I've connected with the local 4-H groups to use this as an educational program for the kids to learn how to farm, because it is that oldest, greatest generation that is the most at risk right now. And it is the youngest generation that doesn't know where food comes from half the time. So on top of that, I've connected with our local community college and a beautiful professor out there who I'm not going to name for personal reasons, who's helping pull all of these resources together. I spent an hour and a half on the phone with him in a parking lot today, and I'm getting a proposal typed up and sent out to my local communities because it's a matter of urgency, and getting your community to start growing food for your community now, regardless of what the intelligence communities are doing, regardless of what the bullshit happening at the federal level is doing, it secures a source of food. And seeing a true leader response, seeing a true equitable response to the emergencies that we're facing, because people are panicking, people are scared, we're having runs on stores. And when they start seeing the tractors pulling up the fields and people going behind and putting seeds in the ground, they can say, I, I didn't even think that we could do this. And I hope that what I can do is to inspire people to keep finding things that people will say, I didn't even think that we can do this. Because this was something that I was sitting there just like, how the hell am I going to feed all of the people in my county? I can't, but I can get all of the people in my county to do a little bit of work to feed themselves. Because even in social isolation, I'll call it physical isolation because I hate the term social, you can have 8 people working a quarter acre of land, all spread 100 to 125 feet apart, still talking, still interacting, still building a community that we have been devastated against and lost. So I don't have a good answer. I can't stop the deep state. I can't prevent them from drone striking me today. But what I can do is try my hardest until they find a way to stop me, to return power to my city and give people something to defend when these troops come in to take it. So that's my hope, I guess, is that people can reach out into their communities and find solutions that divert the response. Because if my community is not screaming that they need help from the state and federal government, there is less of a reason for the military to come into my community. If we can secure our own food in 3 months by growing root vegetables initially, having beans grow on top of those and corn grow above it, we will have food. And this is something that Steve actually inspired me to care about. And then one of my friends reached out to me about mutual aid. And I'm going to use this entire process and working with all of these people to also talk about Julian Assange, because I'm connecting with everyone on my local level. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a Julian Assange activist. I'm really worried about press freedom, but I need to make sure we can feed everyone so I can have a community to organize in 6 months.
I
So
totally agree, Andrew. That's one of the best things I've heard, because obviously I've been telling people to get prepared. And right now, I mean, if you're listening to Andrew Cuomo, if you're living in New York like me, they're saying not 2 to 3 months anymore. They're not saying 3 to 6. They're saying 6 to 9. So the more prepared you can be, the better. I'm going to jump off the stream so you can give Ray a little bit more time. You guys are killing it. How can people support you that are in my audience other than just going to actionforassange.com? Where can they really help you out? And let's not forget this issue. You know, like you just said, we've got hardships coming up, but at the same time, we still have to press people to understand, you know, that Roger Waters interview with Tucker Carlson. It was fantastic. It's something that kind of just blew by in the wind because of everything that was happening in the country. How can people continue to support Assange and hopefully now in rapid fashion get him out of what may be a death sentence?
So if you go to our website, which is horribly out of date, we still have banners up from our DC event. The wonderful people that help us behind the scenes have a lot of personal things going on. There's a post in there called Thursday Toolbox. I talked about it at the beginning of the stream, but it offers 3 different technologies, ResistBot, contacting Congress, and then one other tool. And what it allows you to do, those 3 different technologies, one of them enables you to send faxes to your state and local government officials, as well as some within executive administrations. Contacting Congress gives you the addresses and phone numbers to every United States representative in the House and in the Senate. It gives you their local office phone numbers, their local office addresses. Christine, Miss Assange, has been urging people to do handwritten letters, to do polite calls of support. And then the other tool that's on there gives you the social media links, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, as well as the phone number for their congressional office in DC to contact them. We're all isolated. People are telling us to stay home. use these digital tools to make their office a central hub of information for Julian. Send them faxes with every news article you can find. Run them out of paper, for goodness sakes. Yeah, Thursday Toolbox. What we're hoping is at least for an hour every Thursday that people can take a little initiative to send this. I would love people to do it during the vigils so they can listen to us talk and send faxes like crazy or send tweets like crazy to these people. So get involved locally, but at the same time, make sure that we can keep our eye on the prize of getting Julian Assange out of prison. Because at the end of the day, we have so many rights to defend right now that we can bring these struggles together.
And not just rights, but also people. And Julian was the king of saving people. This whole WikiLeaks cost lives is the total opposite of the truth. WikiLeaks saved lives. Julian saved lives. Julian saved lives that there was nobody else who could save. And I'm not Snowden, obviously, but also others, other journalists, other at-risk whistleblowers. Julian stepped in and intervened and saved them. And we need him back for many reasons, but also for that reason. I just want to show you something very quickly, Andrew, that I've just stumbled across, and that is that Occupy Sandy, who is a group that supported tens of thousands of people in New York City during Hurricane Sandy by setting up mutual aid centers, by commandeering warehouses, by getting people to donate the things they don't need, and then finding people who needed those things, and working with churches actually as well to find places of refuge for people who were stranded because their homes were flooded. Yesterday, unfortunately we've missed this, it was yesterday, but they shared a national organizing call for COVID-19 on Facebook. And when I go and have a look at that, I discover that it was hosted by Inter-Occupy. Inter-Occupy is the group that coordinated 2,000 occupations worldwide, got them all in contact with each other and all supporting each other. I strongly suggest that you make contact with Occupy Sandy on Twitter, and that you make contact with Inter-Occupy on Facebook, and you can tell them that I sent you because I've worked with both of them. So that's a good hookup for them, and you can show them some of your streams and they'll definitely take you seriously. Those groups have experience, on the ground experience with supporting tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of people. They are the top-notch people to be working with in a situation like this. So that's my advice to you.
Thank you.
Oh, and I
So
would add, oh, sorry, I'm always adding one last sentence. I'm so sorry. I was just going to say also, Occupy Sandy, even though they were based, their hub was in New York City, they actually recruited thousands of people around the whole world to do information support and comms support and technical support for them as well. So while they were helping people physically on the ground, they had these hubs on the ground. They actually created a global network of supporters to get involved and to donate and to ship things to them and all kinds, do logistics work for them and all kinds of amazing things. So if you want to do something, you know, on as large a scale as possible, I would definitely throw your efforts in and those of your network with Inter-Occupy and with Occupy Sandy. That's all I've got to say.
Yeah, some great initiatives, and we will put that in the that Twitter handle. We'll put that in the chat for you guys. So I see that we do have a question from K.E. Christian. That is our friend with the Denver crew, Kendra. And she is asking, this is for you, Susie, so you may want to stick around for a second. She is asking, on paper, is New Zealand worse than the United States when it comes to these types of bills? And I believe that she's referring to the ones that you were discussing that are outlined on protectsusie.com.
Sure. So basically, these bills are either regurgitations of bills that have been introduced in other Five Eye countries, or they are passed in New Zealand and then replicated across the Five Eye countries. So, for example, we had the 2013 GCSB bill legalizing mass surveillance. USA had the USA Freedom Act. Aussie had the Aussie Data Retention Act. UK had the UK IP bill. Canada had the C51 CSEC changes. So the tendency is that these draconian measures are replicated across the English-speaking countries, and that's never really mentioned. It's seldom mentioned to the target country when the bill is being passed, but these governments are working in concert with each other to pass these measures. So you are highly likely with almost all, if not all, for example, the terrorism control orders that I was talking about, where the police commissioner can arbitrarily apply punishments to you without ever arresting you or taking you to court. That was passed in the UK, I believe, about 8 years ago. And then it was passed in Australia about 5 years ago. So even though it's relatively new in New Zealand in 2019, it's not a unique initiative.
So I want to say it's really interesting to me that we're having very similar legislation being passed in countries that do not share any borders, really. I think that that was something that was discussed in the One versus Five Eye campaign. So I do want to kind of do we want to go to news, guys? I did step out here for a second. I had to take care of something on my phone. So do we want to go to the news section of the evening? I think it's important maybe to touch
Sure.
on, again, some of the initiatives surrounding getting Julian out of Belmarsh prison, because there is such a high risk of him being really impacted by this virus, considering his health is not in the greatest of conditions, and also to being in a prison population, it's much easier to contract the virus. Steve, it seems that you do want to bring up a point, and then maybe we can move to our news section of the evening.
I'd like to get Ray's thoughts on the Earn It Act, if I could. And then way back in the chat thread, there was a question to Ray specifically about what he knew about Canadian spy agencies. So if you want to take a swing at either one of those.
I heard the second one about Canadian spies.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know much more than the next person who reads the press about Canadian spies. What was the first question you had?
The Earn It Act that's being pushed through Congress right now that ends end-to-end encryption for private citizens.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what can I say? I think you've said it all. I guess they don't want us to communicate securely, huh? I mean, hello, that's pretty clear. You know, I had something that I was going to offer tonight, if it were useful.
Yes, please do.
It might take about 7 or 8 minutes. It has to do with it has to do with this notion, and I think it's relevant and important. WikiLeaks was not available before 9/11. Now, 10 years ago, two of our veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, Colleen Rowley, who is the division counsel at the FBI office in Minneapolis, and a fellow named Bogdan Zakovich, who led the red team for the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. His job was to see if he could penetrate aircraft, if he could penetrate airfields, whether he could get on actually plane and with a bomb or with a simulated bomb. And they both were very frustrated because they knew what was coming. And the people they were working with were blissfully either stymied or unaware of what was coming. And so I suggested to them that they write an op-ed and see if the LA Times would print it, and they did. The date is October 15th, 2010, which I guess is about 10 years ago, huh? If WikiLeaks had been around in 2001, could the events of 9/11 have been prevented? The sense of the article is almost certainly, okay? Okay, what it says here is the potential of WikiLeaks has not really been explored in any detail. This is 2010. Huh? Lately, the two of us, that is Colleen Rowley and Bogdan Zakovich, have been wondering how things might have been different had there been a quick, confidential way to get information out. Okay? One of us, Colleen Rowley, was the special agent counsel at the FBI Minneapolis division, and she worked closely with those who arrested this fellow called Zacarias Musavi. You could remember Musawi. He was the fellow who was really interested in learning how to steer a major aircraft, but didn't really much care about taking off or landing. Okay, He had lots of cash, and he said he just want to have an ego thing that, I mean, just smelled to high heaven. And the people at the training facility got in touch with the FBI. The FBI found some pretext to arrest him. Okay, he had overstayed his visa or something like that, and they said, "Look, this guy looks really suspicious." They asked FBI headquarters in Washington, "Give us permission to look into his computer. Give us permission to see what he's up to." And they said, "No, no, can't do that. Can't do that." So they were denied the opportunity to look into this fellow who turned out to be, according to the 9/11 Commission, the kind of first reserve terrorist to take control of a plane. Whether he was the he was sort of being trained to do that. So Colleen Riley was talking with a fellow named Samet, who was one of the workers in the FBI division there in Minneapolis, and she said, um, uh, why don't you get your boss online here? Why don't you get him to push this with the FBI people in Washington? And so the boss said, "Look, um, what he's trying to do is prevent someone from taking a plane and crashing it into the World Trade Center." Quote end quote. I'll say that again. Samet's boss pleaded with headquarters FBI in late August 2001. He was trying to keep someone, quote, keep someone from taking a plane and crashing it into the World Trade Center, end quote. Yes, he was that explicit. Later at Moussawi's trial, Samet, the agent, testified that he thought his superiors were guilty of criminal negligence. Okay, now it's a no-brainer to say that if Moussawi's arrest was publicized, or if the FBI just let these guys, the headquarters, let them look into his computer, this whole thing could have been prevented. Particularly if the other hijackers found out that that Moussawi was captured and the thing was blown. Now the other thing has to do with Bogdan Zakrovich, who led this red team. Now he said, let's see, we'll get this exactly right. Yeah, 9 out of 10 times it would be possible for me to smuggle weapons aboard and seize control of airplanes, but the team's reports were ignored and suppressed, and the team was shut down entirely after 9/11. Finally, the FAA was so angry at these guys for finding how vulnerable the airfields and the planes were that they started notifying the airlines before these undercover operations. This task force, red team, would go into the airports so what happened? Well, Zakrovich testified to the 9/11 Commission. Nothing appeared in the final report. Now, the observation here is pretty simple. Career bureaucrats in government are risk averse, right? They don't like to be whistleblowers. They don't want to stick their neck out, okay? Well, here, Zakrovich and Colleen Rowley and Samet, the agent, they were asked, if WikiLeaks were up and running before 2001, and you being aware of all this stuff you couldn't go to the press, you're too risky to go to the press, you couldn't get your superiors to act, well, would you have gone to WikiLeaks? And they both said, yes, we would have. That's big. It's really big. It's actually equally big that the LA Times published that. Now it's right after WikiLeaks started making impact, and these two people who were, sort of right in the field there felt this. Now, you could take that and you could take the invasion of Iraq, which we are celebrating, this week, for Pete's sake, March 20th or so, that we invaded Iraq. Now, I know that there were hundreds of intelligence analysts who knew that they didn't have any weapons of mass destruction. That it was all a construct. Now, do you suppose, and none of them, not one. There was only one intelligence analyst, two actually. One was in the UK, and that's Catherine Gunn. Hopefully, you know her story. There's a film about her now. What's it called? Official Secrets. See it. It's great. And the other one was in Australia. Um, Andrew Wilkie, who's now a member of Parliament in the Green uh, Party. So Catherine Gunn, you know what she did, publicized this NSA instruction to spy on others in the Security Council. What Andrew did about a week before the attack, got up and said, you know, this is a crock. We know that this is not true. And we ought to tell we have tried to tell the prime minister, but he won't listen. So Wilkie told it all, and he got character assassinated just like everybody else. Now, the question arises, was there no one with the kind of conscience that Catherine Gunn or Andrew Wilkie had that knew about this bogus weapons of mass destruction, knew that Saddam Hussein was never going to give these notional weapons of mass destruction to terrorists? Was there no one that, presented with a confidential way to get this out into the ether, would have opted for that option? Well, I like to think that there must have been at least a handful that would have done that. So WikiLeaks was not available then. It was not an option. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that people should realize that great crimes can be avoided. Susie talked about the good that Julian Assange has done for people. Well, there's untold good that's not going to be done if WikiLeaks is shut down, if people are intimidated by what happens to Julian Assange. And I just thought I'd bring that out because it's so seldom been mentioned. If WikiLeaks had been available before 9/11 and also before the attack on Iraq, I feel morally certain that somebody would have had the guts to say, "Well, this is chancy, but it works." Julian Assange is not going to mention who gave him this, and they would have done it, and all kinds of calamities could have been prevented. You can fast forward to the coronavirus. I don't know if it would be applicable in that situation, but if it's not there, untold evil can't be prevented.
That was amazing, Ray. Thank you for sharing that. Taylor and gentlemen, I'm going to step out because it is 6 o'clock in the morning here and I have got to function for dependents today. But Ray, it has warmed my heart so much seeing you. And I now am going to go and read everything I can about Colby. Sorry, what was his first name? Director Colby. William Colby. I need to do a lot of reading on that. And I hope that sometime in the future I get to pick your brain too, because he sounds like an amazing person.
Yeah, well, you won't find any. There's one or two articles I can send you about the what I think to be the assassination of William Colby, but he was a lawyer, and he wouldn't deceive Congress like his predecessor Dick Helms did, and so he was in ill repute among all the operations people because he released the family jewels, and he got some people in trouble, and they actually got Dick Helms in trouble. So there are a lot of real bad feeling toward him. And I often wonder what happened to him. And I'm convinced that now he was done in, and I'll send you what little literature I have found on the thing.
I deeply appreciate that. Thank you. That's very, very interesting and pertinent for my area of study. So thank you so much. Okay,
Yeah,
everybody.
I want to thank you so much for joining us once again as a fantastic guest co-host. Once again, very happy to have you joining us. And I know it is late for you over there. So again, your time is very much valued. And guys, do follow Susie on Twitter if you are not already, at Susie3D. Also follow her campaigns, Protect Susie, that's on Twitter, at Protect Susie. Also go to the website protectsusie.com, which she had referenced earlier in the stream. Very important information on that website. You could see more about Susie's case specifically, but then also use it as a reference for what's happening today. You could really look through her timelines and see the legislation that's being passed in New Zealand. So do go to that website again. That's protectsusie.com. And if you can, please do donate to the campaign at protectsusie.com/donate. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
You're so welcome. Thank you all. Take care.
Good to see you again.
You too, Ray. Bye-bye.
Taylor, are you still there?
Yes.
Yeah. My mother said I couldn't stay up any later than 10:30. So I'm going to have to dig out now as well. Sorry I was late. Thanks for doing this, and good luck to you all. Andrew, that was a wonderful, wonderful explication of something tangible that we can do. I mean, that was worth the price of admission as far as I'm concerned. So thank you all, and we'll see you soon.
That's not even the only project that I'm working on. That is one of about 4 or 5 that I've picked up since the virus picked up here in the US. So
you talked about counties, but you didn't talk about a state. Which one is it? Can you share?
I'm in Ohio. And I don't believe in central power above the municipal level personally. So for me, it's trying to return as much power back to the most direct form of government possible. And the intelligence agencies carry the slogan, never let a good crisis go to waste. I carry the same thing, except it's for creating policies that empower people as opposed to empower intelligence states. So I'm really hoping that this can start as planting seeds and metaphorically blossom into municipal banking, municipal internet, and just so many other ways that we can steal power back from the hands of our oppressors.
Well, good luck on that, and goodbye to all of you. Steve,
thank you for joining us.
Take care.
All right, guys, that was Ray McGovern, a returning guest on the vigils and supporter of Julian Assange. You can follow him on Twitter if you are not already, at Ray McGovern. And again, a big thank you to him for joining us. A big thank you to Jason Burmis as well, and Susie Dawson for being our guest co-host of the evening again this week. So we do have quite a bit of news we want to get into. I know that we did touch on earlier about the petition that they are, the petition that is being put forth so Julian could potentially be getting out of Belmarsh prison. I know we've discussed that. It was something we wanted to talk about with the news. Also, I want to also discuss the playlist that was put together by the DEA campaign, the Don't Extradite Assange campaign. I was able to meet some of the members of that campaign while I was in London. Great people, very hardworking, put on a very effective and powerful march and presentation in London. They put together this playlist of videos, documentaries, and just things that you could watch while you're at home in self-quarantine or self-isolation, all related to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And here is the list that's on your screen right now. I've watched quite a bit of material related to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and Snowden, but much of this I have not seen myself. So I'm not sure, Andrew and Steve, if you guys have had an opportunity to see some of these documentaries and movies, but if you want to maybe touch on your thoughts on this list that's being put together.
So I'm super excited because I haven't seen any of these. Like, I've seen bits and pieces, I've seen audio clips out of them, but I've never sat down to watch all these. If you could keep scrolling, Steve, because I just want to show people how prolific this is at this point. Because there's tons. There is enough material here registered by hour to keep someone busy for the longest time possible. And I think it's extremely, extremely important not only to watch these yourself, but to spread these into as many groups as possible. Put these on every message board you're involved in. Put this in every Facebook group you are in. not to detract from anyone else's struggle, but to show them this is what will happen to us if we cannot free this man. This is the information this person has given us. So I just want to emphasize the fact that these documentaries, and it keeps going, like it even goes down into the TV show that he did on RT that was turned into cypherpunks. And it's just so powerful. Something that we're trying to figure out here on the back end technologically is how we can actually do watch parties to where we can't stream these because they're copyrighted from places across the world, and we literally cannot stream them. They'll rip our channel down. They'll take away our streaming privileges, what sucks to have to say. But we're trying to find other avenues to distribute this information in a way that we can get together like we do for vigils to watch them. It just won't be on a live on YouTube or Rockfin or Periscope, but we're working on other possible options that aren't violating copyright law, because the last thing we want is copyright strikes or literal charges because we shared videos from sources that people still own the rights to.
What we can do though is organize general watch parties through the Action for Assange Discord server, which you guys should join, by the way. Somebody can throw a link to that into the chat. That would be awesome.
Yeah, and to explain a little bit about the Discord server, if you are not familiar with Discord, it is a way for all of us to communicate with one another, and any skills or talents that you have, whether that be editing video or putting together graphics, or just doing some research for us, or if you want to get involved in activism and speak with the three of us directly, you can do so on the Discord server, and we will put that link in the chat for you guys. And it really helps us with our vigils and using your unique talents to help with the show, and then also to kind of bounce ideas for different actions you can take to help the situation is really important too. So we'll put that link again in the chat. So that again, that we were just showing you was the DEA campaign list of videos that you can watch while you're in isolation. So it's a really clever idea on their part. I know that there are some other items of news that we did want to get into. I also want to bring up this fact. Again, I did step out for a second, so my apologies if this was brought up earlier in the show. But as far as London goes and what's taking place at this hearing, the Daily Mail has reported that criminal trials expected to last more than 3 days are to be postponed over the coronavirus. Now, Assange's court appearance isn't really a trial, it's a hearing, so I don't know if this is subject to the same sort of restrictions here. And again, this is for cases that are due to start before the end of April. In this case in particular, this hearing has already started already, so I don't know if it's subject to
now. I've got that. I've got that
set up for you guys. Yeah, so I mean, again, this is something that we're going to be keeping an eye on, keeping you posted about as far as being able to get to London again in May. We're just going to see. Honestly, I can't really say either way. The situation is changing daily. In fact, it's changing hourly, to be honest. And there's a lot of speculation and things we think are going to happen don't happen. And then another thing too is that we have a very unpredictable president right now who, just remember, 2 weeks ago said this was not a big deal, who is now on the verge of calling for a mass quarantine. And I think it's just important to remember that this is a very uncertain situation.
Not only that, but he's going to out-left the left.
Yeah.
He's going to hand out universal basic income checks while ordering martial law and killing end-to-end encryption. Like the
term there is actually pre-existing in history. It's called National Socialism.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people are aware, but what that means or what that comes from is the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Party in Germany, where they used their ability to wage global war to expand their internal surveillance state, provide resources to the population that they found most convenient to have around for their labor exploitation, while at the same time murdering a shitload of people called the Holocaust. But were able to roll out social programs well enough that they were able to continue the gravy train until someone stepped in. So just to kind of define the term national socialist there, because we have the democratic socialists and the nationalists are now pushing the socialist policies. So kind of do some math and you figure out like, this is bad.
I mean, look,
Taylor's face is like, she just looks like, whoa.
Yeah, it is. Andrew, you really pieced together this stuff very well. I was also just, yeah, I mean, this is just so insane. I honestly, on a personal note, I cannot believe what is happening right now. Like, I mean, I can believe it, but it's really shocking. And I want to thank like you two in particular and our group chat and Signal, they know who they are, for helping us get through this, because seeing this play out is so frightening to me. And it's really, really scary to see people, here I go again, in independent media that are like calling for mass quarantines and who are suggesting that the government should have done something a long time ago as far as urging everybody and requiring everybody to quarantine themselves. That is so problematic. You are part of the problem if you are advocating for this. And I'm not speaking for everybody here. I'm speaking for myself
no,
here.
that's a fucking problem.
Okay. Well, I just wanted
That's
to
a
put that out
goddamn
there.
problem. If you're using your weight as a social media influencer and that time is spent screaming about we should have quarantine camps, people should be on lockdown, shit like that, dude, and you want to call yourself like any kind of lefty or libertarian or anything like that, you're out of your fucking mind. Like,
Ron Paul's stream today, he's actually fucking crushing it. If you're watching us on YouTube, swipe the video down or what the fuck ever and go to the Ron Paul Liberty Report, subscribe, turn on notifications, hit the little bell thingy, do all that shit. Ron Paul's on his stream today read a quote from one of their friends who they didn't disclose the source was, but this was a prominent libertarian who had been in so much support of Trump before all of this. And he literally said, I hadn't realized that our country was North Korea. I hadn't realized that our freedoms had been removed, and I hadn't realized the government had already seized total control. So I would like to point everyone to Ron's channel because he is fucking doing it right. And I am very proud to be someone that watches his channel, to be able to say, go watch this man, because it's the information we need right now, not that physical separation, because fuck the term social separation. Don't use their words. Don't use their terminology. Physical separation. That's an important thing because of this situation. Staying home if you're sick is an important thing because of this situation. Caring for your neighbors is an important thing because of this situation. But if we're putting out all calls and feeding into the narrative of let's get camps going, there's a problem because we have them. You can go on Google and type in FEMA camp locations and see where the fuck they're going to herd you right now.
Yeah, they just released this was back in February. But 11 different military bases right by major airports are set to be converted to emergency hospitals. And that's a detainment center. That's a detainment facility that's quickly going to expand to become a camp. And that's in the order, that's in what the fucking that's the statement from like the Joint Chiefs when they fucking opened up the bases.
And it's a matter of time until the Walmarts, the barren infrastructure of Walmart gets turned into a camp. Those big ass buildings. It's a matter of time before malls get turned into camps because people already can't go into them. We have the documents.
Andrew, can you talk about the importance of also too, I feel like you wanted to finish up your point, but I do want you, because you shared this with me and this was really impactful, was, you know, a lot of us are really fearful right now, not fearful of the virus itself, but fearful of this response and what's to come, because this is very indicative of an American empire collapsing, because we knew that it could not sustain itself. And I don't know how, looking at the numbers right now, how we're going to be able to continue on with normal lives in the years to come. It's just not possible. That's a really devastating thing to kind of face and come to terms with. And I think it's very easy for people to really, really upset and feel very complacent and very stuck. And you brought up a great point about using that energy for good.
So
Yeah,
what they're trying to do right now, and I'll pass it to Steve after I'm done real quick.
you're probably gonna say the same shit I am.
Yeah, they're trying to roll out, they're trying to get a response from the public so they can roll out the solutions that they already have in place. The literal terminology is called problem, reaction, solution. So there's a particular policy that they want to pass. So, and then a problem presents itself. They use the media to gear people to a particular reaction and then offer the solution, which is the original policy that they want to pass. 9/11 and the Patriot Act, best example. So my idea and what I'm trying to do is outpace their reaction with community-based change, with literally getting people to do something, to show them this is a response. So that way they don't cry out for the National Guard. So they don't cry out for the military in our streets. And that, not to say that independent media, to point back to that conversation earlier, is doing this because they're nefarious. Like, I don't think that that's the reason. I think that they are as scared as we are. And we, as the viewers and consumers of their content, have to show them what a solution looks like that is not the reaction-based solution that they're trying to get us to. So if we, as a community of people that are intelligent and thinking, can outpace the reaction of the government, because it is a slow roll, we can evolve out of this as a civilization to whatever ends you believe. I'm a municipalist. I'm going to build power at my local level the best I can. Other people may have different ideas and different concepts. Put them on the table. Call your city and say, hey, have we thought about this? It might save some lives. So we have to beat their reaction. And the thing that I want to do, and I wish Susie was here because she would talk about this way better than me, Freeing Julian Assange Part 3. In there, it specifically outlines the matrix, the establishment, the deep state, the global capitalist complex, whatever you refer to this thing that is assaulting our society right now. They move slow. She just showed you how it's taken them almost a decade to put these policies in place. It's not going to take us a decade to grow food. It's not going to take us a decade to get a municipal infrastructure set up that is free from larger existing government regulations. It just takes you being that one awkward person in your community saying, have you thought about this? And then when they say no, you say, well, you know, it would be really cool if we could try to figure out how to do this. Because ultimately, if we, as thinking people, as the content creators, as the consumers of content that know what is actually going on, in a sense, because none of us actually know what the fuck is happening, can alter the reaction of the citizens, not of the government, but of the citizens, we can keep the military out of our streets, at least in some parts and in some respect. Because if you have food security, if you have a response that shows your community that your community can take care of itself, they're not going to cry out for national and state level infrastructure. So be the reaction, be the solution, and stop them from causing more problems.
That was great, Andrew. Steve, do you want to react to that?
From the very first episode that I ever did of Slow News Day, I said that I wanted one of the aims of the show to be to get the people who were watching to go out and get their communities more sustainable and less reliant on local government. I've been hammering that from the moment that I got on the mic, and here we are with the perfect moment to do any number of things. We can get our fucking general strike practice in. The strike from home that a lot of people have advocated as the most nonviolent way to do a general strike, where you can't just be wiped out en masse in the middle of the street. We can do that now. Everybody's supposed to be at home. Withholding labor can be a giant bargaining step coming out of this. Nope, sorry, not going to work. Already at home. Already got supplies. Already grew food. Already knew what to do. Yeah, you know. So that can happen. We can, along with sharing a WikiLeaks playlist, we can circulate the teach-ins that we were going to do live, so we can help educate people more and more about Julian Assange. If you are a member of an activist group, please put us in touch with whoever your chapter head is, because we'd like to send those to the chapter heads so they can then be distributed throughout the membership list. Um, I have always said that growing food is a revolutionary act, because you're a government that wants its citizens dependent on it and afraid of it wants to control the food supply. And when we've got food coming in from different countries that we can grow here, when we've got food rotting in the fields because it needs to meet a set amount of market price, we've got problems, especially when we have hungry people in this country. Um, the city of Toronto, and I'll kind of come back after this, but several years ago, the city of Toronto tried a pilot program where they took decommissioned city buses and they turned them into mobile grocery stores, and they drove them in to food desert communities in order to get the people that live there uh, fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. I tried to get a similar thing going here. Santa Cruz didn't bite, so we did it locally. We fed about 14 food insecure families just off the little food garden I had. It was pretty cool. Um, in terms of what Andrew's saying, yeah, we've got up to 18 months now. They're saying that it could take to get a vaccine made and distributed to everybody. That's plenty of time to get to know your neighbors. That's plenty of time to figure out what skills you have that are beneficial to your community. That I'm Because look, man, if we're only getting a little bit of UBI, what do we do with that? We're going to have to survive on a lot more barter. We're going to have to trade labor for labor. We're going to have, it like that's. I live in a small town. My good brother, who passed away a few years ago, had a saying about, if you want a long life in a small town, you've got to do right by your neighbors. Well, all of our towns are about to get real small, but our community is about to get way bigger. That's kind of how I want you to think about that.
And so from the very first episode, and like I'm terrified, but from the very first episode, we have advocated for the idea of decentralized activism, for the idea of being the one person in your community willing to do this. And as we're entering, or as we're in this period of physical separation, there's no better time to go out yourself and act. There's no better time to go out and be the one person sit-in in a lobby. There's no better time to go out and hang up posters and do banner drops and all of these other things that we've been discussing for so long here now, 37 weeks, I think. So I just hope, because we're probably about to transition into our news section, but as we kind of conclude this, that we've inspired some people, that there's at least someone amongst the 45 viewers plus Periscope viewers that we have now that are willing to use this fear that they are creating in us by distributing misinformation, by telling us almost nothing, by saying, nah, we're good, 2 weeks later saying, nah, this is going to July, by putting out a fake release, by getting leaked documents that say 48 hours and we're going to quarantine. and then saying, oh, no, that wasn't real. Because what that does is it allows the NSA to gauge the response of individuals and communities about the quarantine and allow them to transfer that that information to the military to say, hey, here's the front line. So as whatever the fuck this is continues happening, be the person in your community to stand up and feel awkward and make a difference, because we have a time right now to save real lives, like to really save people's lives, not just have metaphorical conversations about political concepts, because the only concept that we will see is a boot to our fucking neck unless we can stop what they're trying to roll out right now.
That was very well said, as always, Andrew. And just to add to that as well, I want to make note too that this is a very real threat, the way that our governments are responding to this. It's completely disproportionate. And also, too, people are going to be more willing to accept a government mandated quarantine when they have already been feared into self isolating and to self quarantining. Once the government steps up and then intervenes, they're going to be less apprehensive to this and not really reject it. And in these times of extreme fear, and many people are fearful of this virus, they're more willing to accept very authoritarian measures on behalf of the government that they otherwise would absolutely oppose. And what I really worry about here is that looking ahead, we are going to what's going to become a thing is that we are living in a post-coronavirus world. And that is not to say that I don't want the coronavirus to go away. That's not what I mean, but that our world's going to be so fundamentally changed that that will actually become something like we have a post 9/11 world. I'm very fearful that we're heading in the direction of a post-coronavirus world, and taking what Andrew said and taking that very seriously and following his lead is an important way to ensure that it doesn't happen. So I think that we did get through quite a bit of news, unless there are some other things that we do want to touch on. We didn't have too much news going on. I know that we
real
did
quick,
speak about the prison. Go
real
ahead.
quick. There's this is a direct assault on your sense of community. It's a direct challenge to your sense of community. And they can take away sports, and they can take away bars, and they can take away your ability to gather with more than 5 people. But they can't take away your sense of community. Don't let them do that. Don't. Like you're going to have to give up a lot of shit eventually, maybe, but you don't have to give that up.
And it's the superficial things that we're giving up. It's the things produced by slave labor currently
Lucky
that
like
we're
us,
giving up.
lucky.
Like Amazon has converted to only delivering medical supplies as well as high demand products, right? That's an entire industry that was built on the exploitation of slaves in third world countries. Like, thank God Amazon has stopped shipping. Find a way to have your community make the things inside of it. Because I don't know if people know, China stopped buying our garbage a couple years ago. We started this trade war. They stopped purchasing our trash. This sounds really dumb, right? Like, why the fuck are we talking about garbage? Because it's now turning into a problem. And we have the ability, if we're trying to build a sustainable community, that we can set up municipal recycling programs that then distribute the recycled materials directly to worker-owned factories in your community that then distribute those in exchange for the food for those workers. And we can build this. We don't need them. They need us. And I think that's important to remember, because they're about to realize it. That's what this talk about Trump's UBI is. They put $2.2 trillion into the repo banking market, and it's still collapsing. But they turned and they're like, how do we prop this up? Well, let's give everyone $1,000 a month. Let's blow trillions of more dollars into this fucked up, broken system so we can try to continue it. So that way, when Amazon comes back online, people can sign back up for Amazon Prime because they're getting $1,000 a month, and we can start drone deliveries for groceries and keep everyone inside of their houses. I don't know, I'll stop talking now because I'm just ranting at this point. But be the difference, be the change, be the person that puts yourself out there as this awkward leader that says like, hey man, like, can we try to save as many lives as we can right
Yeah,
now?
it's needed at
But
this time.
I want to,
Again, we'll post this in just quickly. We will post this as its own separate clip to YouTube about the coronavirus and ways that you could get involved. This kind of segment right here that'll be separate from our discussion about Julian Assange and his situation to kind of help you guys. Because again, like Andrew was saying, a big part of this is about decentralized activism. So we'll make this its own clip.
and so I want to talk a little bit about, because they put out a beautiful press release, Doctors for Assange, to get back to the topic on hand and to why everyone's here. So they released a statement today about Julian's incarceration, and I don't have it in a nice format to pull up because it's like copied and pasted. Steve might. Oh, wonderful. This is powerful. Spread this to your communities, because this press release isn't going to come out from any mainstream outlets. At this point, it's not going to come out through most independent outlets, and that breaks my heart to say, because these are the people that inspired me to sit in this chair and say weird shit to people on camera. So I'm going to read this real quick. Dear Minister, thank you for replying. Thank you for your reply dated 18 February 2020 to our correspondence of 15 November 2019 and 1 February 2020 to accompany our letter published in the Lancet regarding the health and human rights of Julian Assange. We note that in your reply to us, you cited the Australian government's willingness to provide consular assistance to Mr. Assange, which you advised you are unable to do because he has withdrawn his consent for you to provide consular services. However, where gross violations of human rights is concerned, we respectfully submit that consular assistance is not the issue. In the case of the Australian citizen's human rights being abused, including his human rights to health, his right to freedom from torture and arbitrary detention, his right to a fair trial, his right to lawyer-client confidentiality, and his right to prepare defense. We are reliably advised that consular assistance aside, government ministers can advocate for due legal process and raise concerns about gross violations of rights with their overseas counterparts. In Julian's case, all of the above human rights have been violated in a manner that endangers his health and contributes to his prolonged psychological torture as assessed by the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture and 2 medical experts specialized in the assessment and documentation of torture. We wrote to you on December 15th, 2019, that Julian Assange's life is at risk due to nearly a decade of human rights abuses, including arbitrary detention, psychological torture, and medical neglect. Now, with the president of the Prisons Governors Association warning the prisons provide fertile breeding grounds for coronavirus, Julian's life and health are at a heightened risk due to his arbitrary detention during this global pandemic. What threat will only grow? That threat will only grow as the coronavirus spreads. These are surely matters in which government ministers have not only the ability, but the obligation to raise concerns about gross violations of rights with their UK counterparts. Moreover, we at Doctors for Assange and the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture are not the only groups and authorities concerned about the gross violation of Julian Assange's rights. Grave concerns have been raised by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, NSW Council of Civil Liberties, Reporters Without Borders, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and most recently, the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute. According to the Australian government's own Human Rights Commission, a federal government has the overall legal responsibility to ensure the Australian citizens' human rights are protected. In light of this, we would like to draw your attention to the March 10th statement. Can you scroll up, Steve? I'm reading off a different monitor. in light of this, we would like to draw your attention to the March 10 statement by the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute following Julian Assange's February extradition hearing in London. A statement which reads in part, the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute is concerned that the mistreatment of Julian Assange constitute breaches of his rights to a fair trial and protections enshrined in the UN Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatments or punishments to which the UK is party. It is deeply shocking that it is deeply shocking as a mature democracy. Oh, you scrolled past me. An assured democracy in which the rule of law and the rights of individuals are preserved. The UK government has been silent and has taken no action to terminate such a gross and disproportionate conduct by Crown officials. This extradition trial we are witnessing is a serious undermining of due process and the rule of law. The Institute added that Julian Assange's treatment is shocking and excessive. It is reminiscent of the Abu Ghraib prison scandal. And I'm just going to stop there because it just keeps going. Now's the time. Now's the time to act. Now's the time for this man to go free. And to kind of talk about a situation involving the prisons and involving the coronavirus that's happening here locally. Susie brought up, and it is an accurately sourced, accurate statement, that the state of Ohio is releasing prisoners, nonviolent, I believe, non-sexual offenders from jail. But there's a word there that has to be added. Nonviolent, non-sexual citizen offenders. I have a personal friend of mine, not going to use any names, whose significant other is in an ICE detention facility in a different part of Ohio. She was illegally transferred there from a court in Geauga County to this other prison. And it's not just an ICE detention facility, it's also a common prison or a state prison, right? I heard this news about Cleveland and Ohio releasing prisoners. I called him right away. I was like, hey, call and check. She might get out. She might be going free. He calls me back a couple hours later and says, they're only releasing citizens. They're not releasing immigrants from prisons. When our supply chains break down, and it is dependent 100% on government to distribute food across this country, I would like to point out the fact that we already treat immigrants like shit. We already have camps across this country, prisons across this country, filled with people guilty of the crime of simply living, right? We're not going to send food to the people that our government already hates when the people that our government wants to exploit as a labor force after this need to be fed during this time. We have a pending Holocaust in front of us. We have a pending Holocaust in front of us, and our nation, our elected officials, our government, the people that we are forced to give money to every week from the fruits of our labor, are going to cut these supply chains. They're not going to send food to these places when the food gets scarce because the global supply chain has broken down. And we're going to have millions, not exaggerating, millions of immigrants in camps across this country die from the coronavirus, from other diseases that may come from exposure to these other diseases, from simple medical things like the flu or the staph infections that are already rampant in prisons, or just fucking starvation. And it's horrifying to think that our government is now put in a position where it will have to choose between feeding the citizens on the streets that it wants to exploit labor from versus the citizens, the non-citizens in prison. They're not going to send medical supplies to these prisons, to these camps. We already don't have enough tests for our communities alone. We already don't have enough masks for our communities. We don't have enough hospital beds for our communities.
We don't have enough masks for the hospitals. That's where we're at. There's a lot of talk about like people need to go on ventilators. You know that's going to be prioritized by class. We mentioned earlier that I had Jeff Black on my show last night. He has started a petition to the governor of Oregon to release their nonviolent offenders. I'm going to pull that up real quick because at least once or twice during the show, we both stressed, Jeff and I both stressed that if there is not an active petition like this circulating in your state, to go ahead and make one. Jeff said steal the words. I'm going to throw that link in the Action for Assange chat because it's up on my computer. Um, and I'll try and find a way to throw it into my own chat too. Um, but I mean, look, if you
If you
watch
put
the
it in
show
the
last
real
night,
quick, if you put it in the Zoom chat, I can put it out to everyone on Restream.
okay, I will do that. If you watched the show last night, like we echoed a good bit of what Andrew just said, but took it a little bit further too. The purpose of a county jail is completely different from a prison. This is what Jeff's petition is about, is to release nonviolent offenders from jails. Because in jails, most of the people that are there because they can't afford to bail themselves out and are waiting to go to court. In about half of the state, 60 to 80% of a jail's population is people just waiting to go to court. Um, Short time offenders, most nonviolent offenders, or the most nonviolent offenders in terms of per capita per inmate. Um, there's no reason to, other than to actively engage in a Holocaust. Like the more often than not, these people are going to have some place to go. If they don't, Gavin Newsom has promised that homeless people will be able to have some place to stay indoors. I don't know how exactly it's going to pan out. I do know there's a whole lot of empty houses, and 3 nationally for every 1 homeless person. I'm sure we can figure something out. I always like George Carlin's idea where you just let homeless people take over golf courses and they can build tiny homes there,
As an
because
idea, just to
golf
throw this
courses
into
are
the
a testament to man's sloth and greed.
ether, right? Schools are closed. Schools are most likely going to be closed for the rest of the year. Physical separation is a thing we've kind of all come to accept, for better or worse, regardless of what you believe. Physical separation currently exists. Schools, as uncomfortable and not the best conditions as it would be, schools that aren't being used as distribution centers for food right now could be used to house people. They have rooms set up in them that are isolated from other rooms with wide hallways. We, as the people of a city, call your county jail and say, hey, are we letting everybody go? Like, are we letting nonviolent, non-sexual offenders out of jail right now? Literally call your county prosecutor tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock when they open and ask them that question. Follow up with a call to your local school board and say, hey, do we have a plan to house people in the schools not being used for distribution systems? Do these things, do anything, do something, because right now is such a chaotic time that if we do not act as people that come up with these weird solutions to problems, it's over. And I refuse to let it be over. I refuse to go to a mandatory quarantine camp. And probably by saying that, I'm breaking some law. But I would like to actually direct people to look up Corbett Report. He put out a piece in 2009 that he re-put out recently. It's just titled Medical Martial Law. If you refuse a mandatory vaccination in this crisis, you're done. You're going to a camp. If you refuse mandatory testing, you're done. You're going to a camp. If you refuse mandatory treatment, you're done. You're going to a camp. We don't need to be put in camps. We need.
No, that never ends well. Like historically, that just never ends well. There's no bright side to that. And certainly, least of all, not in the U.S., where we've done it to our own citizens more than once. There's ways that we can resist this, and that's only through like spreading this information as if it were a virus all throughout your community. You've got to talk to people about this. Like this is just hitting every single box in every conspiracy theory for the last since behold a pale horse or more. And it's I mean, that's why you see, you know, a fair amount of people on YouTube that are fucking uncomfortable. We're on a shelter in place order. It happened Monday at 4 o'clock. I have kids that are in school. They're no longer in school. They're probably not going to go back for this year, which also says to me, there's no way in hell that the United States, let alone any individual state, is going to have the gumption during this to get out some sort of certified mail-in ballot program where everybody can vote. The odds of having a suspended election, if they're not going to let anybody out to do anything, although the Democrats are really trying to kill some people right now, become astronomically high. If we're under martial law, the Constitution's suspended. We don't have elections. We don't have senators. We don't have representatives. Not in that sense. Not in the traditional sense. Not at all. We're kind of obligated to resist that. There are individual states that are banning gun sales right now, limiting or restricting or banning ammunition sales right now. Now that is something that even the most just bedwetting liberals haven't even, I haven't heard them say a peep about that. Like that's an egregious step. And the bumper sticker says you have the Second Amendment so you can protect the First. That's suspended under martial law. The First Amendment suspended under martial law.
And you have a candidate that goes on Joe Rogan that literally advocates, like, yeah, we're going to make guns illegal, but like, we're not going to send the FBI into everyone's house. Like, bullshit. The FBI is already in everyone's house. It's called your smartphone. It's called your computer. It's called your television. So they're already there. The NSA is already in your house. I have 1, 2, 3 devices sitting in front of me that they're already tapped into. So, I mean, they're already in your homes. And at this point, they're going to be the ones violating the physical separation orders, because they're going to be the ones that come in and drag you the fuck out, drag me the fuck out, drag Jimmy Dore the fuck out, drag Lee Camp, who's already labeled as a foreign state fucking actor, out. And it doesn't matter if you make $100 million a year or $20,000 a year. We're all the same fucking cattle to these people. And they don't think about us in terms of population. They think about us in terms of density and what they need to produce.
Yeah, I mean, great points from you guys. Again, really great stuff here. I did step out earlier when we were talking quite extensively about the coronavirus. I'm not sure if anything I add is going to be something that has already been stated. I don't want to be repetitious here, but again, this response here is completely disproportionate to the real threat. I think I would say that it's quite likely that they do not want to know the real number of people being impacted by this. And it's very obvious that there is either something that is known about this virus that the public doesn't know, or this virus is used as an excuse and as a way to kind of create a perfect situation so some very authoritarian legislation can be put into place that they've kind of wanted for some time. And that's very conspiratorial. I understand that. But if you look at what's happening, nothing makes sense. It doesn't add up. And I think also, too, I saw this on Twitter from a reputable source was retweeting this, was that any disinformation or quote what's considered disinformation or any sort of questioning of the US government's measures to combat this virus would be taken off of YouTube, and potentially, accounts would be shut down over this. All of this is so frightening, but again, I think the greater message here is that we really need to do something to prevent the potential chaos that we could be experiencing. And again, I would say, at least for myself, Andrew and I have talked about this. If there is a shelter-in-place order in Ohio, we are actively going to make a stance and combat that and be very public on purpose. And they can't stop us, really, because there isn't enough police, at least at this point, to prevent people from doing so. And I don't think any
not one of the 18 plus states where the National Guard's already been called up, because mine is.
I don't think they've been called in Ohio, have they?
I have no proof either direction. I had some reports of people saying they saw a shitload of helicopters. I've had reports of people that I work with saying they've seen Humvee caravans down highways. But I have no confirmation either way. There's speculations of sites where they're at, but those are known, like open public, hey, this is just a National Guard base. So I'm not positive, but that's how they do this, is through secrecy and through fear.
Yeah, and a lot of people will go along with it. It's amazing. It's really amazing. Young people who are otherwise quote unquote progressive free thinkers are practicing social distancing. It's outrageous to me. It's ridiculous. And it does get me a little bit fired up. But I think that we've hit all of our news for the evening, but I want to give you guys an opportunity for some last statements before we go around and close out. If there's anything else that you want to touch on or really drive home before we do that.
Yeah, before we close out, we played this at the beginning of a couple vigils. I really love it. It's like the greatest thing in the world to me. So I'm going to play Chelsea Manning's campaign ad from 2018 that wasn't played enough at all. So let me get this pulled up here real quick.
I'm Chelsea Manning, and I approve this message.
We live in trying times. Times of fear. Of suppression. Of hate. We don't need more or better leaders. We need someone willing to fight. We need to stop asking them to give us our rights. They won't support us. They won't compromise. We need to stop expecting that our systems will somehow fix themselves. We need to actually take the reins of power from them. We need to challenge them at every level. We need to fix this. We don't need them anymore. We can do better.
You're damn right we got this.
So she's not running for office currently. That's a campaign ad from 2018. It is more relevant today than it was when she produced it. She's a leader to me. Chelsea Manning's a hero to me. And I am fucking proud that I got to go stand outside of her prison and demand her release. I'm proud of the fact that I got to get so many people together that my ears rang for 2 hours from 30 whistles blowing under an overpass, because I would like to think that that in some way helped to move this. Chelsea Manning still has a personal GoFundMe up, I believe, to help her raise money. We're probably not going to DC. Um, give as much as you can to Chelsea. Give as much as you can to Susie. Give as much as you can to Jason Burmis and the Courage Foundation. They're about to give us $1,000 a month. Give it to them. Give it to the people that are fighting, but also join a mutual aid group. Left turn here. What mutual aid is it's people helping people. Go on Facebook, type in mutual aid, whatever part of the state you're in or whatever county you're in. If there's not a mutual aid group set up, get one set up, find a local organizing chapter, connect with InterOccupy or Occupy Sandy to see what they're setting up. Connect with literally any other person that's willing to help other people. I started a page on Saturday to get this going. It had 28 people the first 24 hours. It's over 900 people right now. I get to help people. I get to save people's lives. I get to distribute information to these people that they're otherwise not going to be exposed to. I took a lady a meal and I set it on her porch. I walked to my car. She was standing on her porch and we had a conversation about her day. Physical distancing. This is not social distancing. This is standing far enough away from someone that they don't smell your breath when you talk. We need community. We need physical distance with social interaction. We need people helping people right now. And I think I hope that the people watching and the people that will watch later just really understand that we're not fucking helpless little shitbags living in our houses, isolated from society because of the fear of some virus. We are powerful. We are strong. And courage is way more contagious than the coronavirus ever will be. So get out in your streets, talk to your local officials. All of them are answering their phones because they're not in their offices, and make a difference for your community. So that way, when they come down to it to respond with the military, the only reason that they would be there is to take the resources and the power that you have developed in that community and give your community something to defend. Give them a reason to come together, regardless of what party they're on or what sports team they love to watch on Sundays. Give your community a reason to be a community again. And if the 40 people that are watching right now are in different counties across the country, that's 40 counties that we can develop a food sustainability program because the infrastructure is there. There just has to be one person to make a call to get it all turned on and activated. I started on Monday, it's Wednesday. I'm probably going to see groundbreaking 2 weeks from now, turning soccer fields because of physical distancing that aren't being used into a place that the food for this community is going to grow. Be the change, be the difference. Courage is way more contagious than the coronavirus.
And I wanna make a point here to just kind of go into how nefarious the term social distancing is, because you're absolutely right. It's physical distancing. The CDC wants you to stay like 6 feet away from someone, which I'm told is still lethal taser distance. Um, Fun fact I learned on Saturday. Um, but social distancing is a, almost an implied threat, the way that I hear it. And what that means is, um, we know that solitary confinement is torture. We know that. We talk about it on the show all the time. And what the TV machine and what way too many fucking content creators are running around screaming is isolation. And that is so detrimental to your being that you become more malleable, more easy to control. You can have just you're more or less programmable at that point. And that's why the term social distancing is being thrown out by every media outlet. It's what if that doesn't scream agency buzzwords to you, it should, and I hope it does now, because Andrew's absolutely right. Physical distancing when there is a virus that is, you know, apparently killing several thousand people now, you want to be out of range of it. Um, it's an aerosolized virus, which means it travels through the air. So you can pick it up, you know, X amount of feet away from someone. You respect your personal space. There's a lot of people that probably need to learn how to respect personal space in the first place. Now that we've learned how to wash our hands, next week we'll go to shapes and colors, you know? Like, this is what the country is going through right now. Having to be taught how to wash their hands, how being taught how to not just get right up on somebody. Like, this is a 50, 60-year war on education coming to fruition right fucking now. And we have never been more propagandized. We've never been easier to control, driven to division, driven to distraction than we are right now. So let's take the opportunity to break that. You can take all of Stanford and MIT's classes online. You can't get the degree, but you can get all of the coursework. Pretty much any major university in any field of study that you want, you can get all of the coursework for free online. If you're going to be stuck at home for 18 months, well, fucking learn some shit. Get a mushroom field guide. Go hiking.
And real quick, if I could throw this in there.
Throw it in there.
Throwing it. I love content creators. I love the independent media. I wish I could connect with more of them. And so my last call to action, and I promise this will be the last thing because I've thrown like a jillion calls to action to everybody. If a content creator is using the term social distancing, super chat them, because people love super chats and money, and tell them, please call it physical distancing and demand people build community. That's it. Tell the independent media, stop using social distancing as a term. Call it physical distancing. Tell people to stand 10 feet apart, for fucking Christ's sake. But don't tell people to stay in their house when we need people to go lead our communities away from this cliff.
Call it mind your fucking businessing.
Right. Call it don't breathe on me-ing. Call it anything, but don't call it social distancing. And we need to ask them, not tell them, not yell at them, not chastise them for using these terms that we're inundated with. Ask them, say, please call it physical distancing. Don't call it social distancing. And that's, you can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman, and I will kick it over to Taylor.
Yeah, great discussion tonight, guys. This is something that, Andrew, you are so equipped to be able to be guiding people in this situation. I really, really mean that. Andrew is a master organizer and just always has so many great ideas of how to deal with these situations. And despite the fact that it is like very depressing and it's easy to kind of fall into a very negative mindset, you are positive in your response, and that's such a good thing. We need your voice right now. We really do. And yeah, so I just want to thank everybody for joining us again. We will be making I will be making some clips of this visual to kind of separate the coronavirus stuff from, or coronavirus content from the Julian Assange content, because I think that the messages being sent about the coronavirus here tonight are so important. My name is Taylor Hudak. You can follow me on Twitter @_Taylor Hudak, and you can follow me on Instagram @journalist_Taylor. I just made an Instagram a few weeks ago, so you can go on there as well. And then also this Saturday, I'll be on a live stream at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with the Myth Informed crew from Milwaukee to talk about any subject, I think, as it relates to the coronavirus. And I will be on that stream, and all of the, I believe it's all of the money raised, or they're trying to raise money to go towards people who are suffering from the coronavirus, or to kind of help this situation that we're in right now, which is a serious financial situation that's only going to get worse as a country. So that is on Saturday. And I just am happy to be experiencing this with all of you guys, because it makes it a lot easier. And like I said, like, we are all friends here. We talk every day, all day long, and I'm just really thankful and grateful for you guys. And we will see you. Well, you know what? We want to do more vigils, so maybe we'll do one before Wednesday. We'll see about that. But we will see you all next Wednesday, and maybe before then.
Steve.
Hi. If you don't know me yet, I'm Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find it here on the YouTubes if you type in Slow News Day Podcast into the search bar. I'm on Twitter @Slow News Day Show. Yeah, don't let them take your sense of community at all. Now is the perfect opportunity to educate your community about Julian Assange and what's happened to him. Like, everybody's going to have a lot of time to sit in front of a screen and watch some shit. So take advantage of that as often as possible. If you can organize watch parties with your friends, go ahead and do that. We will start something in the Discord off of the WikiLeaks playlist, the DEA's playlist. That's hilarious, by the way. Well, thanks so much, guys, for hanging out and being a part of this with us. We loves you all. And till next time, good luck to us all.